Tonight, the vast emptiness of the open ocean holds secrets far darker than the depths below. We're diving into 8 of the most disturbing true cruise ship horror stories ever documented. Stories where luxury vacation dreams transformed into nightmares at sea, where passengers vanished without a trace, and where the isolation of international waters became a hunting ground for the unthinkable. These aren't legends whispered among sailors or urban myths shared on internet forums. These are verified incidents, documented disappearances, and testimonies from survivors whose voices still shake when they recount what happened in those endless corridors and on those moonless nights. What makes these accounts particularly chilling is that they occurred in places designed for joy and relaxation, surrounded by thousands of witnesses. Yet the victims found themselves utterly alone when terror struck. These are true horror stories. Sarah Chen had planned every detail of this cruise down to the minute. At 28 years old, she'd spent the last 6 years climbing the corporate ladder at a ruthless marketing firm in Manhattan, sacrificing weekends and holidays, missing birthdays and weddings, all to make senior account executive before 30. When Michael proposed on New Year's Eve with her grandmother's ring, she knew exactly how she wanted to celebrate. The Oceanic Dream, 7 nights through the Caribbean, departing from Miami in mid-March of 2019. It was perfect timing, before the summer crowds, but after the winter chill, when the sea would be calm and the islands lush and green. Michael had been skeptical about a cruise at first. He was more of a backpacking through Europe type, hostels and trains and street food. But Sarah had convinced him with promises of private balconies and endless cocktails and the kind of mindless luxury where someone else made every decision. They'd been together for 4 years, living together for 2, and Sarah realized with some guilt that they'd never actually taken a real vacation together. Weekend trips to his parents' lake house didn't count. That conference in Chicago where she'd brought him along didn't count. This was their first true escape from reality, and she was determined to make it perfect. The first 2 days exceeded even her carefully managed expectations. Their cabin on Deck 7 was small, but immaculate, with a balcony that caught the sunrise and enough space for them to unpack without tripping over each other. They'd splurged on the unlimited drink package, which Michael immediately put to use at the pool bar, while Sarah worked through a stack of paperwork she'd sworn she wouldn't bring. Old habits. But by day 2, even she had abandoned her laptop in favor of a lounge chair and a book she'd been meaning to read for 3 years. They fell into an easy rhythm. Breakfast on the balcony, mornings by the pool, afternoon excursions when the ship docked, though they kept those, brief and undemanding. A quick tour of Cozumel, some snorkeling in Grand Cayman, nothing that required too much energy or planning. Evenings were formal dinners where they dressed up and pretended to be the kind of sophisticated couple who regularly ate 7-course meals. They laughed more in those 2 days than they had in months back home. Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. That constant hum of anxiety that had become so familiar, she'd stopped noticing it. On the 3rd night, the ship was at sea, making its way toward Jamaica for an early morning arrival. Sarah and Michael had spent the day doing absolutely nothing, which felt like a radical act after years of relentless productivity. They'd napped, read, made love in the afternoon with the balcony door open and the ocean breeze cooling their skin. It was the kind of day that made Sarah think maybe this whole marriage thing would work out after all. Maybe they could actually be happy. The midnight buffet was one of those cruise traditions that seemed ridiculous until you were actually there, surrounded by pyramids of shrimp and chocolate fountains and ice sculptures of dolphins. Michael had heard about it from a couple they'd met at dinner, honeymooners from Ohio who'd been on 6 cruises and treated each one like a religious experience. Sarah wasn't particularly hungry, but Michael was curious, and she'd learned over the years that indulging his random enthusiasms usually led to unexpected adventures. They arrived at the Lido deck around 11:45, following the sounds of live music and laughter. The buffet was already crowded with passengers in various states of formal wear and casual pajamas, everyone embracing the surreal pleasure of eating crab legs and tiramisu at midnight while floating somewhere in the Caribbean Sea. Michael immediately gravitated toward the carving station, his eyes wide with childlike excitement. Sarah grabbed a plate and surveyed the options with less enthusiasm. She'd eaten too much at dinner and was already regretting the third glass of wine. After about 20 minutes of wandering and picking at food she didn't really want, Sarah realized she was cold. The air conditioning on the Lido deck was aggressive, probably necessary given the crowd and the heat from all the warming trays. But she was wearing a sleeveless dress and her arms were covered in goosebumps. Michael was deep in conversation with the Ohio couple, debating the merits of various cruise lines with the intensity of sports fans arguing statistics. She caught his eye and mouthed that she was going back to the cabin for a sweater. He nodded, barely pausing his conversation, and Sarah felt a flash of irritation that surprised her. This was supposed to be their celebration, their time together. And here he was bonding with strangers about buffet strategies. But she pushed the feeling down. This was what cruises were about: meeting people, being social, embracing the communal vacation experience. She was probably just tired. The wine was making her emotional. The walk from the Lido deck to their cabin on Deck 7 required navigating a maze of corridors and stairwells that Sarah had finally started to memorize. The ship was enormous, over 900 feet long with 15 passenger decks, and she'd gotten lost 3 times on the first day before developing a mental map. She took the aft stairwell down, her heels clicking on the metal steps, passing a few other passengers heading up toward the buffet. The ship's interior at night had a strange quality, simultaneously elegant and slightly unsettling. The hallways were too long and too empty, the lighting just a shade too dim, the carpet pattern designed to hide stains making everything look vaguely dirty. She reached Deck 7 and turned left, walking past identical cabin doors until she reached 7318. Their cabin was near the end of the corridor, which she'd initially thought was unfortunate, but had come to appreciate for the quiet. She pulled out her key card and was about to slide it into the lock when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see another passenger or maybe a crew member, but the corridor was empty. The footsteps had stopped the moment she turned around. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She quickly unlocked the door and stepped inside, letting it close behind her with a solid click. The cabin was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the balcony door, which she'd left open before dinner. She could hear the ocean, that constant white noise of water moving against the hull. She stood there for a moment, her hand still on the door handle, listening. Nothing but the ship's ambient sounds, the subtle vibration of the engines, the distant music from the Lido deck several floors above. She was being ridiculous. Too many horror movies, too much wine, too many hours in windowless conference rooms that had made her paranoid about confined spaces. She crossed to the closet and grabbed her favorite cardigan, the soft gray one that Michael always said made her look like a sexy librarian. She pulled it on and checked her reflection in the mirror, reapplying lipstick and fixing her hair. When she looked presentable again, she grabbed her keycard and opened the cabin door. The corridor was still empty. Sarah stepped out and let the door close behind her, hearing the automatic lock engage. She turned toward the elevator, ready to head back to the buffet and find Michael and maybe have one more glass of champagne because It was their engagement celebration, and they deserved to be a little indulgent. She made it maybe 3 steps before the lights went out. Not all the lights, just the ones in her section of the corridor. The emergency lighting stayed on, those dim red strips near the floor that were supposed to guide you to exits in case of evacuation. But the main overhead lights, the ones that had been casting that warm, yellowish glow just seconds ago, were suddenly dark. Sarah stopped walking and looked back toward her cabin. She could see lights still on in other sections of the corridor, near the stairwells and elevators. Just this middle section, maybe 30 feet of hallway, had gone dark. She stood there, trying to decide if she should go back to her cabin or keep walking toward the lit section near the elevator. The silence was oppressive now. She couldn't hear the ocean anymore, or the engines, or the distant music. Just her own breathing and the faint electrical hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She took a step forward, then another, moving slowly through the dim red emergency lighting. Her shadow stretched long and distorted in front of her. Behind her, she heard the footsteps again. Sarah spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The corridor behind her was empty. Just that long stretch of carpet and identical cabin doors receding into the dim red glow of emergency lighting. But the footsteps had been real. Heavy, deliberate, close enough that whoever was making them should be visible. She pressed her back against the wall, her cardigan suddenly feeling thin and useless. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. The words seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the strange acoustic deadness of the corridor. No echo, no response. Just that oppressive silence that felt wrong on a ship carrying over 3,000 passengers and 1,000 crew members. Somewhere there should be noise, laughter, music, the constant ambient sounds of people living on top of each other in a floating city. She started walking again, faster now, keeping her eyes on the lit section of corridor near the elevator, maybe 50 feet away, 40, 30. Her heels made sharp clicks on the industrial carpet, a rhythm that seemed too loud in the silence. Behind her, the other footsteps started again, matching her pace. When she walked faster, they walked faster. When she slowed, testing, they slowed too. Sarah broke into a run. Her heels caught on the carpet and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Behind her, the footsteps accelerated into a run too. Heavy, fast, getting closer. She kicked off her heels and ran barefoot, her breath coming in short gasps. The lit section was right there, just a few more steps. She burst through some invisible boundary, and suddenly she could hear everything again. The ocean, the engines, distant laughter from somewhere above, the normal sounds of the ship rushing back all at once. She spun around, ready to confront whoever had been following her. The dark section of corridor was empty. The footsteps had stopped, and as she watched, the overhead lights flickered back on, illuminating the stretch of hallway she'd just fled through. Everything looked completely normal. Cream-colored walls, patterned carpet, numbered doors. No signs of anything unusual or threatening. Sarah stood there, breathing hard, her cardigan askew and her bare feet cold on the carpet. Her abandoned heels lay in the middle of the corridor where she'd kicked them off. She felt foolish now, embarrassed by her panic. It had probably been another passenger, someone who'd gone into their cabin while she was running. The lights had been on some kind of timer, maybe conserving energy in less trafficked sections. She was letting her imagination run wild, seeing threats where there were none. She walked back and retrieved her heels, checking the corridor as she did. Still empty, still normal. She slipped the shoes back on and smoothed her cardigan, trying to compose herself before returning to the buffet. Michael would ask what took so long, and she'd have to decide whether to tell him about her moment of irrational panic or just laugh it off as the wine making her jumpy. The elevator arrived within seconds of her pressing the button. Sarah stepped inside, grateful for the bright lights and the cheerful piano music playing from hidden speakers. The doors started to close. At the last second, a hand shot through the gap. Large, male. The fingers were grimy, the nails caked with something dark. The elevator doors bounced back open. Sarah pressed herself into the corner, her thumb hovering over the alarm button. But no one entered. The hand withdrew slowly, fingers trailing along the rubber edge of the door. Sarah could see part of a sleeve now, some kind of dark uniform. A crew member? The hand disappeared completely, and the doors started to close again. This time, Sarah jammed her finger on the door open button. She leaned out, looking both ways down the corridor. Empty. Completely empty. No crew member, no passengers. No one who could have put their hand in the elevator door 3 seconds ago. The nearest stairwell door was at least 30 feet away, too far for anyone to have reached in the time it took her to react. Sarah let the doors close and pressed the button for the Lido deck with shaking fingers. The elevator began to rise. She watched the floor numbers change. 8, 9, 10. Between 10 and 11, the elevator jerked to a stop. The lights flickered. The piano music cut off mid-measure, replaced by static from the speakers. Sarah pressed buttons frantically. Lido deck, lobby, any floor. Nothing happened. The emergency phone was in a small panel next to the floor buttons. She grabbed the handset and lifted it to her ear. Dead. No dial tone, no static. Just silence. She was about to hang up when she heard breathing on the other end. Not her own breathing. Someone else's. Slow. Raspy. Like someone who'd been running hard or was struggling to catch their breath. Hello? Sarah's voice cracked. Is someone there? I'm stuck in elevator number... She looked for an identification number and couldn't find one. I'm stuck in an elevator on my way to the Lido deck. Can you hear me? The breathing continued. Then a voice, barely audible, so distorted by static that Sarah couldn't tell if it was male or female. You shouldn't have come back. What? I don't understand. Can you send someone to... You shouldn't have come back to your cabin. The voice was clearer now. Definitely male. Speaking slowly, carefully enunciating each word. We were watching you. We've been watching you since Miami. Since before Miami. Did you really think this was random, Sarah? Did you think you were chosen for an upgrade by accident? Sarah's blood turned to ice. Who is this? How do you know my name? Everyone knows your name. It's on your cabin door. 7318. You left the balcony door open again. That's dangerous, Sarah. Anyone could climb from the balcony below. The railings aren't that far apart. We've done it before. The elevator lights went out completely. Sarah screamed, dropping the phone. In the darkness, she heard movement. Not from the phone, from inside the elevator with her. The sound of fabric rustling, of someone shifting their weight. She wasn't alone. The lights came back on. The elevator was empty except for Sarah. The phone handset swung on its cord, disconnected. The doors dinged open cheerfully, revealing the bright lights and crowd noise of the Lido deck. Sarah ran out, pushing past confused passengers, searching desperately for Michael. She found him still at the buffet, laughing with the Ohio couple, a plate of desserts in his hand. Sarah, there you are. I was starting to wonder if you'd fallen asleep. You were gone almost 40 minutes. He took in her appearance, his smile fading. Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah opened her mouth to tell him everything. The footsteps, the elevator, the voice on the phone. But the words wouldn't come. Because over Michael's shoulder, she could see one of the crew members, a tall man in a dark uniform, standing near the exit. He was watching her, staring directly at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. When he saw her looking, he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that showed too many teeth. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Sarah grabbed Michael's arm hard enough to make him wince. We need to go back to the cabin, right now. We need to lock the balcony door. We need to... But Michael was already shaking his head, laughing nervously at the Ohio couple who were watching this interaction with obvious concern. Babe, you're scaring me. What happened? Did someone say something to you? Sarah couldn't explain, couldn't find the words to describe the feeling of being hunted, of being watched, of being chosen for something she didn't understand. All she knew was that the voice on the phone had been right. She shouldn't have come back to her cabin. And now it was too late. Michael never saw Sarah again after that moment at the buffet. Security footage would later show her entering the corridor toward cabin 7318 at 12:43 a.m., her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. Walking quickly, glancing behind her every few steps. The camera captured her reaching the door, inserting her key card, and stepping inside. The timestamp read 12:47 a.m. She never appeared on any other camera on the ship. Michael had gone back to the cabin around 1:30, expecting to find her asleep. The room was empty. Balcony door locked from the inside. Her heels placed neatly by the closet. Her phone charging on the nightstand. Everything exactly as it should be. Except Sarah was gone. He'd called security at 2 a.m., frantic, convinced something terrible had happened. They'd searched the entire ship, every deck, every corridor, every public space. Nothing. 4 days later, the Oceanic Dream was preparing to dock in Miami when a passenger in cabin 7322, just 2 doors down from where Sarah and Michael had stayed, complained about scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. Maintenance initially dismissed it as pipes or electrical issues. But the passenger insisted, describing sounds that were too rhythmic, too deliberate to be mechanical. Scratching, tapping, almost like Morse code. The crew opened the maintenance panel in the corridor, the same stretch where the lights had malfunctioned that night. Behind the panel was a crawl space, narrow but tall enough for someone to stand, running the length of the corridor between the cabin walls. The space was supposed to be sealed, accessible only during construction. Someone had removed the fasteners from inside, creating an entry point that was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside the crawl space, they found Sarah's engagement ring, her grandmother's ring with the small diamond that caught the light. It was sitting on a narrow metal beam, placed carefully, deliberately, like an offering. Around it, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were words. The same words repeated over and over, covering every surface within reach. You shouldn't have come back. The space showed signs of prolonged occupation. Food wrappers, water bottles, a blanket, and dozens of photographs, printed on regular paper, tacked to the walls with thumbtacks. All of Sarah. At her office in Manhattan, walking to the subway, entering her apartment building, having coffee with Michael. Pictures taken over months, maybe years. Someone had been watching her long before she ever stepped onto the Oceanic Dream. The FBI investigated once the ship docked, but the case immediately became complicated. The crime, if there was a crime, had occurred in international waters. Jurisdiction was murky. The Oceanic Dream was registered in the Bahamas, operated by a corporation based in Luxembourg, with crew members from 20 different countries. Within a week, the story disappeared from the news cycle. Michael hired private investigators. They found nothing. The crew member Sarah had seen watching her from across the Lido deck, the tall man in the dark uniform, didn't exist. No one matching that description worked on the ship. The voice on the elevator phone couldn't be traced. The maintenance crawlspace had been professionally wiped clean of fingerprints and DNA. Sarah's cabin was cleaned and rented to new passengers on the very next cruise. The maintenance panel was sealed with stronger fasteners, though no structural changes were made to the crawlspace itself. It's still there, running behind the walls of Deck 7, a narrow passage where someone could stand and watch and wait. The Oceanic Dream still sails the Caribbean on 7-night cruises. Cabin 7318 is available for booking. The reviews mention how quiet it is, how peaceful, how you barely hear your neighbors. Sometimes passengers report strange sounds at night. Scratching, tapping, footsteps in the corridor when no one is there. The crew has learned to smile and blame it on the pipes. Michael never went on another cruise. He never remarried. On the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, he receives an envelope with no return address. Inside is always the same thing, a photograph of Sarah, one he's never seen before, taken from an angle that suggests the photographer was very close. Watching, waiting. And on the back, in careful handwriting, "She's still sailing with us." David and Jennifer Morrison had debated for months about whether they could afford a honeymoon at all. The wedding had drained their savings, despite their best efforts to keep costs down. Jennifer's parents had helped with the reception, and David's uncle had given them a generous check. But after paying off vendors and returning gifts that didn't fit in their tiny apartment, they had maybe $3,000 left. Not enough for the 2 weeks in Greece that Jennifer had fantasized about since college. Barely enough for a long weekend somewhere domestic. It was Jennifer's co-worker who suggested the cruise. Mediterranean splendor, 11 nights from Barcelona to Rome with stops in France, Monaco, and several Italian ports. The co-worker had done it the previous summer and raved about the value. If you booked an inside cabin, the kind with no windows or balcony, deep in the ship's interior where you couldn't see the ocean or feel the movement, you could get the whole trip for under $2,000 per person, including food and entertainment. David had been skeptical. A honeymoon in a windowless room sounded depressing, maybe even claustrophobic. But Jennifer had done the math and realized they could actually afford it if they were careful about excursions and drinks. They booked cabin 4087 in late May for an August departure, giving themselves 3 months to save a little extra spending money. Jennifer researched every port, creating detailed itineraries for their days on land. David worked overtime at the hospital where he was finishing his residency in emergency medicine, pulling double shifts that left him exhausted but padded their honeymoon fund. By the time they boarded the Mediterranean Splendor in Barcelona on August 12, 2017, they had an additional $1,500 and genuine excitement about their budget adventure. The ship was more impressive than either of them had expected. Massive, almost overwhelming in scale, with 15 passenger decks and a capacity of over 4,000 passengers. The lobby alone was larger than their apartment, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and a grand staircase that belonged in a palace. Jennifer squeezed David's hand as they checked in, both of them feeling underdressed in their travel clothes, while other passengers swept past in expensive resort wear and designer luggage. Finding their cabin required navigating a maze of corridors that all looked identical. Deck 4 was deep in the ship's interior, below the main public areas, but above the crew quarters and mechanical spaces. The hallways were narrow and windowless, lit by fluorescent lights that gave everything a slightly greenish tinge. Their cabin was near the end of a long corridor, far from the elevators and stairwells. Jennifer tried not to think about how difficult it would be to evacuate in an emergency from this deep inside the ship. Cabin 4087 was smaller than it had looked in the photos online. Much smaller. The queen bed took up most of the floor space, leaving just enough room to squeeze around the edges to reach the bathroom or the narrow closet. There was a small desk bolted to one wall and a television mounted near the ceiling. No windows, of course. No natural light at all. The walls were covered in a dark, patterned fabric that was probably meant to look luxurious, but mostly made the space feel like a cave. Still, it was clean and functional, and theirs for 11 nights. Jennifer immediately started unpacking, determined to make the space feel homey. They spent their first day exploring the ship, getting oriented, finding the best spots for coffee and the quietest deck for reading. Barcelona slipped away behind them as they sailed east toward Marseille. By the time they returned to their cabin that first night, they were exhausted from travel and excitement and the overwhelming sensory experience of being on a massive ship with thousands of strangers. David fell asleep almost immediately, his years of residency training having taught him to sleep anywhere, under any conditions. Jennifer was more restless, still adjusting to the subtle movement of the ship and the absolute darkness of the cabin. She'd brought a small nightlight, the kind that plugged into an outlet. But David had asked her not to use it. He needed complete darkness to sleep properly after years of grabbing rest in the hospital call rooms. So Jennifer lay there in the blackness, listening to David's steady breathing and trying to relax. That's when she heard the other breathing, different from David's, shallower, coming from a different direction, somewhere near the foot of the bed, maybe closer to the bathroom. Jennifer's eyes strained uselessly in the darkness. The cabin was completely sealed. No light from the corridor seeping under the door, no ambient glow from electronics. Just pure, disorienting blackness. The breathing continued. In, out. Deliberate and controlled. Not the unconscious rhythm of sleep, but the careful respiration of someone awake and listening. Jennifer's hand crept across the bed toward David, ready to wake him. But as her fingers found his shoulder, doubt crept in. What if it was just the ventilation system? These cabins were deep inside the ship, requiring artificial air circulation. Maybe what she was hearing was just air moving through ducts, creating sounds that resembled breathing in her tired, anxious mind. She lay still, listening, trying to distinguish between actual breathing and mechanical sounds. The rhythm was so steady, it could be either. In, out, never varying, never stopping. Jennifer slowly sat up, reaching for the lamp on the tiny nightstand. Her fingers fumbled for the switch in the darkness. When the light clicked on, the cabin was empty except for David, still sleeping peacefully beside her. The breathing had stopped. Just David's normal sleep sounds now, slightly congested from the air conditioning. Jennifer looked around the tiny cabin. Bathroom door open, clearly empty. Closet door closed, but too small to hide an adult. Nowhere for anyone to be, except the space she could see in the warm glow of the lamp. She was being ridiculous, letting her imagination run wild in the unfamiliar darkness. She turned off the light and settled back into bed, willing herself to relax. David stirred slightly beside her, throwing his arm across her waist in his sleep. Jennifer focused on that contact, on the solid reality of her husband beside her. Outside their sealed cabin, The Mediterranean splendors sliced through the dark waters of the Mediterranean, carrying them toward ports where sunlight and open air would make this midnight anxiety seem foolish. But as Jennifer finally drifted toward sleep, she heard it again. That other breathing. Closer now. Close enough that she should be able to feel breath on her skin. She lay frozen, eyes wide in the darkness, too terrified to reach for the light. The breathing moved, slowly, circling the bed. And Jennifer understood with absolute certainty that they were not alone in cabin 4087. They had never been alone. Jennifer didn't tell David about the breathing. The next morning, with sunlight streaming through the ship's public areas and the excitement of docking in Marseille ahead of them, it seemed absurd. A product of exhaustion and an overactive imagination adjusting to the sensory deprivation of a windowless cabin. They spent the day exploring the old port, eating bouillabaisse at a waterfront restaurant, climbing the hill to Notre Dame de la Garde. By the time they returned to the ship that evening, Jennifer had almost convinced herself the previous night had been nothing. Almost. That second night, she woke at 3:17 a.m., according to the glowing digital clock on the nightstand. Something had pulled her from sleep, some instinct screaming danger. The cabin was pitch black again, David beside her, breathing deeply. But this time, Jennifer didn't hear breathing from elsewhere in the room. She felt a presence, the weight of someone's attention, the certainty of being watched. She lay perfectly still, every muscle tensed, eyes straining uselessly against the darkness. Seconds crawled past. Then she saw it. A shape, darker than the surrounding blackness, somehow visible despite the complete absence of light, standing at the foot of their bed, tall, motionless, a human silhouette that shouldn't exist in their locked cabin. Jennifer's scream tore through the silence. She lunged for the lamp, her hand slamming against the switch. Light flooded the cabin. Empty. The foot of the bed was empty. The bathroom door still open, clearly unoccupied. The cabin door still locked, the security latch engaged from the inside. David sat bolt upright, disoriented and panicked. What's wrong? Jen, what happened? Jennifer was breathing in gasps, her heart hammering. Someone was standing there. Right there at the foot of the bed. I saw them. David looked where she was pointing. Nothing but their suitcase on the floor and the television mounted on the wall. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. Babe, there's no one here. The door's locked. Look. He got up and checked, demonstrating the security latch. No one could get in, even if they had a key card. I saw someone, David. I'm not imagining it. I believe you saw something. But it's dark in here, completely dark. Your eyes can play tricks, and you're probably anxious. New place, no windows, it's disorienting. His voice was gentle, reasonable. His doctor voice. Let's keep the bathroom light on with the door cracked. It'll help. Jennifer wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. What had she seen, really? A shadow in absolute darkness. Maybe he was right. Maybe the stress of the wedding and the strangeness of the cabin was manifesting as nighttime hallucinations. She nodded, letting him arrange the bathroom door so a sliver of light entered their sleeping space. They lay back down, David's arm protective around her. Eventually, she slept. The third night, they were both awake when it happened. They'd returned from a long day in Monaco, both exhausted from walking and sun exposure. They'd had wine with dinner, enough to make them pleasantly drowsy. David fell asleep first as usual, but Jennifer wasn't far behind. The bathroom light was on, door cracked, providing just enough illumination to make the cabin feel less oppressive. Jennifer woke to David shaking her shoulder. Jen, wake up." His voice was wrong, tight with fear. She opened her eyes and saw him sitting up, staring at the foot of the bed. She started to ask what was wrong when she felt it. Pressure, weight, someone sitting on the edge of their bed near their feet. The mattress was depressed, creating a visible dip in the covers. They both watched, frozen, as the depression slowly moved. Whatever was sitting on their bed was shifting position, the weight redistributing. The bathroom light was on. They could see clearly. There was nothing there. No person, no shape. Just the unmistakable evidence of weight on the mattress, moving slowly along the edge of the bed toward Jennifer's side. David grabbed the phone and called security. His hand was shaking. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "This is cabin 4087. We need someone here immediately. Something's in our room." Security arrived within 5 minutes. 2 officers, professional and thorough. They searched every inch of the tiny cabin, checked the door locks, examined the ventilation grates, even looked under the bed. Found nothing that could explain what David and Jennifer had experienced. No mechanical systems that could create the sensation of weight on the mattress. No drafts that could move covers. The lead officer's face was carefully neutral as he suggested perhaps they'd both been dreaming. "We were awake," David insisted. "Both of us. We saw the mattress compress. Something was sitting on our bed." The officers exchanged a glance Jennifer couldn't interpret. "We'll note this in our report. You might consider requesting a cabin change in the morning." At 6 a.m., Jennifer and David were at the guest services desk, demanding exactly that. The representative was sympathetic, but explained that the ship was fully booked. Every cabin occupied. They could add them to a waiting list in case someone disembarked early at one of the ports, but there were no guarantees. The best they could offer was moving them to a different interior cabin on deck 3. "Is it the same cabin layout?" Jennifer asked. "Yes, identical." "Then what's the point? We need a cabin with a window, somewhere with natural light." "I'm sorry, those cabins are significantly more expensive. The price difference would be—" "We'll pay it," David interrupted. "Whatever it costs." But there were no window cabins available either. Not for 3 more days when passengers would disembark in Naples. They could have an ocean view cabin then, but they'd have to endure 3 more nights in their current accommodation or accept the deck 3 alternative. Jennifer looked at David. 3 more nights in cabin 4087. 3 more nights with whatever was sharing their locked room, or 3 nights in an identical cabin that might have the same problem. "We'll take the deck 3 cabin, today, right now." The cabin change happened within 2 hours. Guest services upgraded them not to deck 3, but to deck 9, a standard ocean view cabin with a large porthole that flooded the space with natural light. The price difference was waived, officially as a goodwill gesture for their trouble, though Jennifer suspected the crew wanted them out of a cabin 4087 more than they were letting on. Something about the way the officers had looked at each other when David described the weight on the mattress, the careful neutrality of their expressions, suggested this wasn't the first complaint about that cabin. David and Jennifer spent the afternoon in their new room, unpacking again, reveling in the sunlight and the view of the Italian coastline passing slowly by their window. The cabin was larger, brighter, with actual space to move around. Most importantly, it felt normal, safe. Jennifer realized how tense she'd been for the past 3 days, her shoulders permanently hunched, her sleep shallow and anxious. Now, finally, she could breathe. They didn't return to deck 4, didn't even go near that section of the ship. The Mediterranean splendor was enormous enough that they could avoid entire decks if they wanted. They fell into a new routine over the next 2 days, one that finally resembled the honeymoon they'd imagined. Sleeping peacefully, waking to sunlight, exploring ports without the exhaustion of disturbed nights dragging them down. On their 5th night aboard, docked in Civitavecchia near Rome, they had dinner at one of the ship's specialty restaurants. The waiter was a young man from the Philippines named Marco, who'd been working cruise ships for 6 years. He was friendly and attentive, making recommendations, telling them stories about unusual passengers and memorable ports. When he brought their dessert, Jennifer was relaxed enough from the wine to mention their cabin change. "We actually started in an interior cabin on deck 4, she said. 4087, but we had some issues with it." Marco's smile faltered. He glanced around the restaurant, checking if anyone was within earshot. "You were in 4087? That cabin was supposed to be closed." David leaned forward. "What do you mean, closed?" Marco hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. Finally, he lowered his voice. "There was an incident, back in February. A passenger murdered his wife in that cabin, strangled her, kept her body there for 3 days before housekeeping found her. He told everyone she was seasick, didn't want to be disturbed. The smell is what finally made someone check." Jennifer felt the wine turning sour in her stomach. "What happened to him? The husband?" "Arrested in Naples. But he killed himself in custody before they could charge him. Hung himself in his cell." Marco shook his head. "Terrible thing. The crew, we all talked about it for weeks. They were supposed to retire that cabin number, change it to something else. I didn't know they'd started booking it again." "What did he look like?" Jennifer's voice came out barely above a whisper. "The husband. Tall, very tall, maybe 6'4", thin, like unhealthy thin, dark hair but balding. And his eyes, I remember his eyes because they bothered me when I served him. Very pale blue, almost colorless. He smiled too much, even when nothing was funny." The restaurant tilted around Jennifer. She gripped the edge of the table. David's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Because she'd seen that man, standing at the foot of their bed. Tall and impossibly thin, with eyes that reflected the lamplight like an animal's. "Are you okay?" Marco looked concerned. "I shouldn't have told you. I thought you knew. I thought that's why you changed cabins." Jennifer couldn't speak. David asked the question for her. "The wife. What was her name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Chen. She was Chinese-American from California. They were celebrating their anniversary." Marco paused. 10 years married. The husband told investigators he killed her because she wanted a divorce. Said if he couldn't have her, no one would. That night, Jennifer couldn't sleep despite the safe cabin and the sunlight that had streamed through their window all day. She lay awake while David dozed, thinking about Rebecca Chen. About 3 days trapped in cabin 4087 with her murderer and her own corpse. About the breathing Jennifer had heard that first night. About the presence standing at the foot of the bed. About the weight sitting on the mattress, that slow, deliberate movement along the edge. At 2:30 a.m., unable to stay in bed any longer, Jennifer got up and opened her laptop. The ship's Wi-Fi was expensive, but she paid for an hour. She searched for Rebecca Chen, murder, cruise ship, Mediterranean splendor. Found a brief article in an Italian newspaper from February. It included photos. Rebecca Chen had been 28 years old, the same age as Jennifer. She'd worked in marketing, lived in San Francisco. The article included their wedding photo from 10 years earlier. Jennifer stared at Rebecca's face, at her smile, at the way she looked at her husband with complete trust and love. And then Jennifer looked at the husband. Tall, gaunt, those pale, colorless eyes staring at the camera with that wrong smile Marco had described. The same man who'd been standing at the foot of Jennifer's bed. She found more articles, details about the murder, how he'd strangled her during an argument on their second night aboard, how he'd hidden the body under the bed, covering it with their luggage, how he'd ordered room service for two, eating both meals himself, how he'd hung the "Do Not Disturb" sign and told housekeeping his wife was violently ill, how he'd showered and dressed and attended the ship's entertainment while Rebecca's corpse decomposed 3 feet from where he slept. The articles mentioned that he'd seemed calm when arrested, cooperative. He'd confessed immediately, showed no remorse, told police that Rebecca's presence had been keeping him company even after death, that she'd visited him every night, sitting on the bed, watching him, that she'd forgiven him. Jennifer slammed the laptop shut. She looked at David, sleeping peacefully in the sunlight that would come streaming through their window in a few hours. They had 6 more days on the Mediterranean Splendor. 6 more days knowing that somewhere below them, on deck 4, cabin 4087 sat empty and waiting. The cabin where Rebecca Chen had died slowly, fighting for air, her husband's hands around her throat. The cabin where her body had lain hidden while the ship sailed on, passengers dancing and dining and celebrating above her. The cabin where something still waited in the darkness, still breathed in rhythm with the living, still sat on the edge of the bed where she'd been murdered. And Jennifer understood now why the pressure had moved toward her side of the mattress, why the presence had focused on her instead of David. Rebecca hadn't been trying to frighten them. She'd been trying to warn Jennifer, woman to woman, victim to potential victim. Because when Jennifer looked at the wedding photo again, really looked at Rebecca Chen's face, she saw something in her eyes. Something Jennifer recognized from her own reflection lately. A tightness around the smile, a careful performance of happiness. And she wondered if Rebecca had known, on some level, what her husband was capable of. If she'd felt that same creeping unease Jennifer had felt in the darkness. If she'd dismissed her instincts the way Jennifer had tried to dismiss hers. The Mediterranean Splendor sailed on through the dark waters, carrying its passengers toward morning. And deep in the windowless interior of Deck 4, cabin 4087 remained empty. Its door closed, its lights off. Waiting for the next honeymoon couple looking to save money. For the next woman who wouldn't listen to the breathing in the darkness. For the next person who would learn too late that some cabins stay occupied long after their guests check out. Margaret Holloway had been dreading the holidays ever since Richard died. 18 months as a widow hadn't made the approach of Thanksgiving and Christmas any easier. If anything, the second year was worse than the first. During that initial year, people had still been checking on her, inviting her to gatherings, making sure she wasn't alone. By the second year, everyone had moved on with their lives, and Margaret was expected to have done the same. But you don't move on from 46 years of marriage. You don't replace a person who knew every story, every private joke, every fear and dream. Richard had been her entire adult life. They'd married when she was 26 and he was 28, just kids really, and they'd built everything together. The house in Portland, the garden Richard had tended with obsessive precision. Their daughter Emily, now living in Singapore with her own family. A whole lifetime of accumulated moments that felt simultaneously precious and unbearably heavy. Emily had suggested the cruise during one of their weekly video calls. A 14-day trans-Pacific crossing from Los Angeles to Sydney, departing November 15th of 2020. It was something Margaret and Richard had always talked about doing after retirement. Richard had died 3 months before he was supposed to retire from his accounting firm, his heart giving out during a morning jog. The cruise had remained on their list of unfulfilled dreams. "Go for Dad," Emily had said. "Do the things you were supposed to do together." He'd want that. Margaret wasn't sure Richard would want her traveling alone, but she booked it anyway. The Pacific Voyager was an older ship, smaller than the massive modern vessels, with a capacity of only 1,200 passengers. It catered to an older demographic, people who remembered when cruise ships were about the journey rather than the water slides and rock-climbing walls. The itinerary was simple. 2 weeks at sea with minimal ports, crossing from California to Australia with stops in Hawaii and Fiji. Plenty of time to read, to think, to figure out what the rest of her life might look like. She boarded in Los Angeles on a gray November morning, feeling self-conscious about traveling alone at 72. Everyone around her seemed to be part of a couple or group. But once she found her cabin, a modest interior room on deck 6, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. She was doing this. Actually doing something instead of sitting in that too-quiet house waiting for holidays to pass. Her cabin steward introduced himself within an hour of embarkation. Andre was perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a slight accent Margaret couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe Russian. He was professional but warm, explaining how everything in the cabin worked, showing her where to find extra towels and how to adjust the air conditioning. "You're traveling alone, Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, noting her title from the passenger manifest. "I am. My husband passed away last year. This was a trip we'd planned together." Andre's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I am very sorry for your loss. It is brave to travel alone. I will make sure your voyage is comfortable. If you need anything at all, you call me directly. I am here to help." His kindness caught Margaret off guard. She'd grown accustomed to the performative sympathy people offered, the automatic condolences that meant nothing. But Andre seemed to actually care. Over the first few days at sea, he proved it. He remembered that she took her coffee with cream and no sugar. He noticed when she seemed tired and suggested she skip the evening entertainment to rest. He made sure her cabin was cleaned at times that didn't interrupt her routine. On the 4th evening, as the Pacific Voyager sailed through calm waters between California and Hawaii, Andre knocked on her door at 8 p.m. carrying a small tray with a teapot and cup. "I thought you might enjoy some tea before bed, Mrs. Holloway. Chamomile. Good for relaxation." Margaret invited him in, grateful for the company. They talked while she sipped the tea. He asked about Richard, about their life together, and Margaret found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone since the funeral. Andre listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, remembering details she mentioned. He told her a little about himself too, how he'd been working on ships for 15 years, how the isolation of the ocean suited him, how he appreciated the rhythm of life at sea. It became a routine. Every evening at 8 p.m., Andre would bring tea. Sometimes they talked for 5 minutes, sometimes for half an hour. Margaret began to look forward to it, this small moment of connection in the vast loneliness of the ship. She told him about Emily and her grandchildren she barely saw, about the house that felt too big now, about how she wasn't sure if she wanted to sell it or keep pretending she'd fill those rooms with purpose again. Andre was sympathetic and understanding. He said all the right things, offered advice that was thoughtful without being pushy. By the end of the first week, Margaret felt she'd made a real friend, someone who understood loss and loneliness because he'd chosen a life of solitude on the ocean, serving strangers who would forget him as soon as they disembarked. On the 8th night, as they approached Fiji, Andre's conversation took a different turn. "You have been alone in this cabin every night, Mrs. Holloway. You do not find it lonely? Frightening even, to be by yourself in the middle of the ocean?" Margaret considered the question. "Sometimes. But I've gotten used to being alone. It's my life now. But you should not have to be used to it. Loneliness is not natural for humans. We are meant to have companionship, connection." He poured more tea into her cup, his movements slow and deliberate. "The crew areas, where I live, they are much deeper in the ship, below the passenger decks. You would be surprised what is down there. A whole other world that guests never see." Something in his tone made Margaret uncomfortable. "I'm sure it's quite different from up here. Very different. Would you like to see it sometime? I could arrange a private tour, show you where the real life of the ship happens. Most passengers never get that opportunity." "That's kind of you, but I'm quite content staying in the passenger areas." Andre's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course, but if you change your mind, you only need to ask. I would be happy to show you. The crew areas are very private, very quiet. No other passengers to disturb you." He left soon after, taking the tea tray with him. Margaret locked her door once he was gone, feeling foolish but unable to shake the unease that had crept into their conversation. She tried to dismiss it. Andre had been nothing but kind for over a week. Surely she was misreading a simple offer. But that night, she couldn't sleep properly. She kept thinking about his expression when he'd mentioned the crew areas, the emphasis on privacy, the way he'd watched her drink the tea, waiting for something. And she realized she'd never actually seen Andre working on anyone else's cabin during the day. Never saw him pushing his cart in the hallways or chatting with other stewards. Only in her cabin. Always in her cabin. Every evening at 8 p.m., when most passengers were at dinner or entertainment, when the corridors of Deck 6 were largely empty, Margaret decided she wouldn't drink the tea anymore. The next evening, Margaret pretended to be out when Andre knocked at 8 p.m. She'd gone to the early dinner seating and then positioned herself in one of the ship's lounges with a clear view of the corridor leading back to her cabin. She watched Andre arrive at her door with his tea tray, knock 3 times, wait, then knock again. When she didn't answer, he didn't leave immediately. He stood there for nearly 5 minutes, his ear pressed against the door, listening. Finally, he produced a key card and let himself into her cabin. Margaret's stomach dropped. Stewards had master keys for cleaning, of course, but entering when a passenger was supposedly out felt like a violation. She waited another 10 minutes, giving him time to realize she wasn't hiding in the bathroom or balcony. When Andre finally emerged, empty-handed, his expression was troubled, almost angry. He looked up and down the corridor before leaving, his usual pleasant demeanor completely absent. Margaret waited until he disappeared around the corner before returning to her cabin. Everything looked normal at first glance, but when she checked more carefully, she noticed small changes. Her toiletries had been rearranged. The clothes in her closet had been touched, shifted slightly. Her journal, which she'd left on the nightstand, was now on the desk. Someone had been going through her things. The following morning, Andre knocked at 7 a.m. Margaret, still in her nightgown, opened the door with the chain engaged. "I'm not dressed, Andre. This isn't a good time." "I was worried about you last night, Mrs. Holloway. You missed our tea. Are you feeling unwell?" His concern seemed genuine, but Margaret could see something else in his eyes now. Something possessive. "I'm fine. I just wanted an early night." Perhaps tonight then? I could bring the tea earlier if that suits you better. Or later, whatever time you prefer. I am very flexible for you. Actually, I think I'll skip the tea for a while. I've been having trouble sleeping, and I think the caffeine might be the issue. Chamomile has no caffeine, Mrs. Holloway. It should help you sleep, not prevent it. He smiled, but there was an edge to it now. I really think you should continue our routine. It has been good for you. You have seemed much happier this past week. Less alone. I appreciate your kindness, but I'm fine. Really. She closed the door, her hands shaking. Through the peephole, she watched him stand there, staring at her door. He raised his hand as if to knock again, then lowered it. Finally, he walked away. Over the next 2 days, Andre appeared at increasingly odd hours. 9 a.m. while Margaret was at breakfast, claiming he needed to check the air conditioning. 3 p.m. while she was reading on her bed, saying he'd brought fresh towels even though she hadn't used the ones already in her bathroom. 11 p.m., knocking softly, asking if she needed anything before bed. Each time, his insistence on entering the cabin grew stronger. Each time, Margaret's fear grew deeper. She began asking other passengers about their stewards. A woman in the cabin next to hers mentioned she rarely saw her steward at all, just evidence of cleaning when she returned from activities. A couple 2 doors down couldn't remember their steward's name. No one else seemed to have the kind of attentive service Margaret was receiving. No one else had evening tea visits or multiple daily check-ins. On day 11, Margaret went to guest services and asked to speak with a manager. She was taken to an office where a weary-looking woman named Patricia listened to her concerns with growing attention. "Andre who?" Patricia asked, pulling up crew records on her computer. "What's his last name?" "I don't know. He's my cabin steward. Deck 6, cabin 6247. Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard. Her expression shifted from concerned to confused. "Mrs. Holloway, according to our records, your cabin steward is Maria Gonzalez. She's been assigned to your room since embarkation. There's no Andre working in that section." "That's impossible. He's been coming to my cabin every night. He brings me tea. We talk about..." "Can you describe him?" Margaret did, in detail. Patricia's face went pale. She picked up her phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in a low voice. Within minutes, 2 security officers arrived. They asked Margaret to repeat her story, showed her photos of crew members. None of them were Andre. They checked the security footage from her corridor, fast-forwarding through days of recordings. The footage showed Margaret entering and leaving her cabin. Showed Maria Gonzalez, a short woman in her 50s, cleaning the room each morning. But it never showed Andre entering with a tea tray. Never showed him knocking or standing outside her door. "Mrs. Holloway," one of the security officers said gently, "are you on any medications? Have you been feeling confused or disoriented?" Margaret stared at them in disbelief. "I'm not imagining him. He's real. He brings me tea every night at 8 p.m. He wants me to visit the crew areas. He's been in my cabin when I'm not there, going through my things." The officers exchanged glances. Patricia cleared her throat. "We'll increase security patrols on your deck and have Maria check on you more frequently. But Mrs. Holloway, there's no record of anyone named Andre working on this ship. Not in passenger services, not anywhere." Margaret returned to her cabin, the officers escorting her as if she were fragile, possibly delusional. They checked every inch of her room, found nothing amiss, and left her with a card containing the security office number. After they left, Margaret sat on her bed, doubting her own sanity. Had grief finally broken something in her mind? Was she so desperate for companionship that she'd invented an entire person? Then she saw the teacup, sitting on her nightstand, still warm, a faint wisp of steam rising from the chamomile inside. And a note beside it, written in careful script. "You should not have told them about me, Mrs. Holloway. Now I will have to visit you differently." Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat in the chair facing her cabin door, the lights on, her phone clutched in her hand with security on speed dial. The teacup sat on the nightstand where she'd found it, evidence that she wasn't losing her mind. At 3 a.m., she heard the soft sound of a keycard sliding into her lock. The handle turned slowly. The door opened 2 inches before the security chain caught it. Andre's face appeared in the gap. In the bright cabin lighting, Margaret could see him clearly for the first time without the softening filter of gratitude or loneliness. His eyes were wrong, too focused, too hungry. He smiled when he saw her awake in the chair. "You're not sleeping, Mrs. Holloway. The tea would have helped. You should have drunk the tea." Margaret's thumb hit the call button for security. "Get away from my door. I've called for help." "They won't believe you. They already think you're a confused old woman. Grief does terrible things to the mind, doesn't it?" His voice was still gentle, still kind, which made it infinitely more disturbing. "I only wanted to help you, to give you companionship, but you rejected it. I'm not alone in rejecting it, am I, Andre? There have been others." His smile widened. "You've been asking questions. That's unfortunate. The others were smarter. They kept quiet about our special friendship." Security arrived within 90 seconds. But Andre was gone by then. The door closed, the corridor empty. This time, Margaret insisted they review the footage immediately, all of it, from every night since embarkation. The head of security, a former police officer named Thomas Chen, agreed to review it personally rather than delegating to junior staff. What they found made Margaret's blood freeze. Andre had been entering her cabin every single night since day one. Not at 8 p.m. when he brought tea and they talked. Later, much later. The footage showed him using a keycard at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., sometimes midnight, entering while Margaret slept. The cameras inside the cabin were disabled, passenger privacy protocols, but the thermal imaging systems required for safety purposes told the story. Andre would stand at the foot of her bed for hours. Sometimes he'd sit in the chair where Margaret was now sitting. Once, he'd lain down beside her on top of the covers. He never left before dawn. Chen's face was grim as he compiled the footage. "Mrs. Holloway, I need you to think carefully. Did you ever drink the tea he brought you? Every night for a week. Why? Because I think he was drugging you, keeping you asleep while he..." Chen didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Further investigation revealed that Andrei Volkov wasn't assigned to Deck 6 at all. He worked in the ship's laundry facility, a position that gave him access to crew areas throughout the vessel, but no legitimate reason to interact with passengers. He'd specifically requested keycard access to Margaret's cabin, claiming he was filling in for the regular steward who was ill. The request had been approved by a junior manager who hadn't verified the story. Chen dug deeper into Andrei's employment history. 3 other cruise lines over the past 8 years. Each time, there had been complaints from elderly female passengers traveling alone. One woman in her late 60s reported that a crew member had been visiting her cabin uninvited. Another, 74 years old, claimed someone was watching her sleep. A third, 71, said a steward had become inappropriately attached, following her around the ship. None of the complaints had been properly investigated. The women were dismissed as lonely, confused, or attention-seeking. Andre had moved to new ships, new companies, each time before any real scrutiny could occur. Margaret's complaint was different. She had evidence. The teacup with residue that would test positive for sedatives. The note in Andre's handwriting. Security footage of unauthorized entry. Chen contacted the FBI, and agents were waiting when the Pacific Voyager docked in Sydney. But Andre knew they were coming. Crew members reported seeing him in the early hours of the final day, moving through restricted areas, accessing parts of the ship where even crew rarely ventured. When authorities boarded to arrest him, Andrei Volkov was gone. His cabin was empty, his possessions removed. The ship was searched for 6 hours. Every deck, every storage area, every crawl space and maintenance tunnel. They never found him. Margaret disembarked with a police escort, gave her statement to authorities, and flew home to Portland. Emily wanted her to come to Singapore, to get away from the memories and the fear. But Margaret refused. She'd survived. She'd spoken up when others hadn't been believed. That had to mean something. 3 weeks later, Margaret received a package at her Portland home. No return address. Inside was a teacup, identical to the ones from the ship, and a note. "I hope you're not lonely, Mrs. Holloway. I think about you every night. Perhaps I'll visit when you least expect it. After all, I know where you live. You told me everything during our talks. The house that feels too big. The garden Richard used to tend. The bedroom where you sleep alone. I'll bring tea." Margaret called the police, but there was nothing they could do. No crime had been committed beyond sending an unwanted package. She installed security cameras, changed her locks, told her neighbors to watch for strangers. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Andre had spent hours standing over her bed, watching her sleep, learning her rhythms, her vulnerabilities, her deepest loneliness. He'd done it to others before her and would do it to others after. Because somewhere on the vast network of cruise ships crossing the world's oceans, Andre was still working, still watching, still bringing tea to elderly women traveling alone, women whose complaints would be dismissed as confusion or grief or the desperate imagination of someone who'd lost everything and would accept companionship from anyone, even a predator who smiled too much and whose pale eyes reflected light like an animal hunting in the dark. The idea for the reunion cruise had come from Tyler, who'd always been the organizer of their friend group, even back at Northwestern. 10 years since graduation seemed like a milestone worth celebrating. And a 7-night Caribbean cruise in January offered warm weather, shared accommodations to keep costs reasonable, and the kind of structured entertainment that would prevent awkward silences if the years had changed them too much. 8 of them had agreed to go, all that remained of a group that had once been closer than family. They met at the Miami port on January 6th, 2018, hugging and exclaiming over how little everyone had changed, though of course they all had. Tyler had put on weight and gotten married, his wife begging off the trip due to pregnancy complications. Aisha was in medical school, exhausted but glowing with purpose. Marcus had made money in tech and couldn't stop mentioning it. Brendan was teaching high school English in Chicago and seemed quieter than anyone remembered. Jenna worked in nonprofit management and had recently gotten engaged. Sophie had become a lawyer in Boston and carried herself with a new hardness. David was doing something vague in finance in New York. And Claire, sweet Claire, who'd been the heart of their group, was a social worker in Denver dealing with cases that had left shadows under her eyes. The Caribbean Queen was exactly what they'd expected from a budget cruise. Large, impersonal, filled with families and retirees. But their group had booked 4 interior cabins on the same corridor of Deck 5, creating their own little enclave. Tyler and Marcus shared one, Brendan and David another. The women split into pairs, Aisha with Jenna, Sophie with Claire. They'd agreed to meet for all meals and activities, to really spend time together rather than splitting up and barely connecting. The first 2 days were better than anyone had expected. Old inside jokes resurfaced. They fell into familiar patterns, the same roles they'd played in college. Tyler herded everyone to activities. Marcus bought rounds of drinks and collected receipts for eventual splitting. Aisha dispensed medical advice no one had asked for. They were older, more accomplished, carrying the weight of real jobs and real responsibilities. But underneath, they were still the same kids who'd stayed up until dawn in cramped dorm rooms talking about everything and nothing. It was on the third night, after an evening of karaoke and too many cocktails, that Brendan mentioned Katie. He and David had returned to their cabin around midnight, both unsteady on their feet. David was already half asleep when Brendan spoke, his voice cutting through the darkness. "I finally have proof about Katie, about what really happened that night." David groaned from his bed. "Brendan, we're not doing this. Not here, not now. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. Cost me $8,000, but it was worth it. He found inconsistencies in the police report. Things that don't match the statements you guys gave." "You guys?" David's voice was suddenly sharp, sleep driven away. "What do you mean, you guys?" "You, Tyler, Marcus, and Sophie. You were all there when she fell. You all gave identical statements to the police. Word for word identical in some places." Brendan sat up in his bed, his silhouette visible in the dim emergence lighting from the corridor. "The investigator thinks someone coached you, made sure your stories matched. Because we were telling the truth. We all saw the same thing happen." "Did you, though?" "Because Katie's parents never believed she just fell from that balcony. She wasn't drunk. She didn't do drugs. She was terrified of heights, never went near the edge at parties." Brendan's voice cracked slightly. "She was my girlfriend, David. I loved her. And I've spent 10 years trying to understand why she's dead." David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "Why are you bringing this up now? Why did you even come on this cruise if you think one of us killed Katie?" "Because I want to give whoever did it a chance to tell the truth. Face to face. Away from lawyers and police and consequences. Just an honest conversation between old friends about what really happened on May 7th, 2008. Brendan turned on the small reading light above his bed, illuminating his face. "I'm going to talk to each of you. Tyler, Marcus, Sophie, and you. One of you knows what really happened. One of you is lying. And what if no one confesses? What if we all stick to the same story we've told for 10 years? Then I go to the police with what my investigator found. I reopen Katie's case. I make sure her death gets the investigation it deserved." Brendan pulled a folder from his backpack and held it up. "It's all in here. Statements, crime scene photos, forensic analysis that was never done properly. Everything I need to prove that Katie's fall wasn't an accident." David stared at the folder, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're making a mistake, Brendan. You're going to destroy friendships, reputations, lives. For what? Katie's gone. Nothing you do will bring her back. No, but maybe she'll finally get justice." Brendan turned off his reading light, plunging the cabin back into darkness. "I'm starting tomorrow. I'm going to talk to Tyler first, then Marcus, then Sophie, and then you. One of you is going to break. I know it." Neither of them slept well that night. David lay awake thinking about the folder, about what might be in it, about phone calls he'd need to make. Brendan lay awake thinking about Katie, about her smile and her laugh and the way she'd looked at him like he was the most important person in the world. About the stories he'd been told that had never quite made sense. About the friend he'd loved and the friends who'd watched her die. The next morning, Brendan didn't show up for breakfast. Tyler went to check on him around 10 a.m., worried he might be seasick. The cabin door was unlocked. David was sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. Brendan's bed was empty, perfectly made. The balcony door stood open, salt spray misting into the room. Brendan's body was found on the pool deck 4 floors below, his neck broken, his skull fractured. The folder he'd mentioned was gone. Security cameras in the corridor had malfunctioned sometime between 3 and 5 a.m., a technical glitch that deleted 4 hours of footage. The only witness was David, who told investigators that Brendan had seemed depressed, had been drinking heavily, and must have gone out on the balcony for air and lost his balance in the dark. The ship's investigation ruled it an accidental death, just like Katie's had been 10 years earlier. The ship's security office was cramped and smelled like burnt coffee. David sat across from Chief Security Officer Ramon Delgado, repeating his statement for the 3rd time. Yes, Brendan had been drinking. Yes, he'd seemed upset. No, David hadn't heard him get up during the night. He was a heavy sleeper, always had been. He'd woken around 9 a.m. to find Brendan's bed empty and the balcony door open. He'd assumed Brendan had gone to breakfast early. Delgado's expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Your friend mentioned something to you last night. About a private investigator. About a girl who died 10 years ago. David's throat tightened. He was drunk, bringing up old college stuff. It wasn't anything serious. He said he had proof that this girl's death wasn't an accident, that some of your friends had lied to police. Delgado leaned forward. That seems pretty serious to me, Mr. Chen. Katie Morris died in a balcony fall at a party senior year. It was investigated. It was ruled accidental. Brendan never accepted it because they'd been dating. He's been obsessed with it for a decade, seeing conspiracies where there weren't any. And the folder he mentioned, the one with his investigators' findings? I don't know anything about a folder. Delgado studied him for a long moment. Mr. Chen, I've been doing maritime security for 20 years. I know what an accident looks like. Your friend's body was found on the pool deck directly below your balcony. But the angle of impact suggests he didn't fall straight down. He went over a railing on deck 14, a restricted crew area, not from your cabin on deck 5. That's 9 floors difference. How did he get up there at 3 in the morning? David's hands were sweating. I don't know. Maybe he couldn't sleep, went for a walk. Deck 14 is locked, requires crew access credentials. Delgado pulled out a tablet and showed David security footage. This is from deck 14 at 2:47 a.m. Watch carefully. The footage showed a door opening. Brendan stumbling through, clearly disoriented. He looked confused, turning in circles as if trying to figure out where he was. Behind him, barely visible in the frame, was another person. The angle made identification impossible. Who is that? Delgado asked. I can't tell. It's too dark. Neither can we. But someone led your friend to a restricted area and left him there, alone and drunk, near an unguarded railing. Delgado paused. Unless you'd like to change your statement about sleeping through the night. David shook his head. Delgado sighed and dismissed him, but not before warning that the FBI would be notified once they docked in Miami. There would be more questions. The remaining friends gathered in Tyler and Marcus's cabin that afternoon. The mood was grim. Aisha was crying. Jenna sat holding her hand, staring at nothing. Claire had her social worker face on, the one she used when delivering terrible news to families. Sophie paced near the balcony, her lawyer instincts clearly in overdrive. Tyler spoke first, his voice heavy. Security asked me about Katie, about whether Brendan had mentioned her. I told them it was ancient history, that Brendan couldn't let it go. They asked me too, Marcus said, about who was at that party, who saw her fall. It was me, Tyler, Marcus, and Sophie, David said quietly. The four of us were on the balcony with Katie when she fell. We all gave statements. They matched because we all saw the same thing. Did we, though? Sophie stopped pacing. Her face was pale. Because I've been thinking about that night for 10 years, and I'm not sure anymore what I actually saw versus what we decided we saw. Sophie, don't. Tyler's voice was sharp. This is exactly what Brendan wanted. To get in our heads, make us doubt ourselves, turn us against each other. Brendan is dead, Tyler. He went over a railing just like Katie did. You don't think that's a hell of a coincidence? The cabin fell silent. Aisha looked up, her eyes red. What are you saying? That one of us killed Brendan? I'm saying we need to be very careful about what we tell the police, Sophie said. Because right now, they're looking at this as suspicious. And 4 of us have a history of being present when someone falls to their death. Claire finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Katie didn't fall. We all know she didn't fall. Shut up, Claire. Marcus stood abruptly. Don't say another word. She was pushed. We saw who did it. And we lied to protect them because we were scared kids who didn't want anyone going to prison. Claire was crying now. I've lived with that guilt every single day for 10 years. I became a social worker because of it. Because I let someone get away with murder, and I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Claire, please. Jenna pulled her friend close. Not now, not here. When then? When they find Brendan's folder? When the FBI starts asking questions we can't answer? Claire pulled away. One of us killed Katie, and now one of us killed Brendan to keep him quiet. We're not leaving this ship without the truth coming out. Tyler moved toward the door. I need air. This is insane. Sit down. Sophie's voice cracked like a whip. Nobody leaves until we figure out what we're going to say. We need our story straight, just like last time. Just like last time, David repeated. That's the problem, isn't it? We did this before. We covered for someone before, and now we're doing it again. The ship's engines hummed beneath them, driving the Caribbean Queen toward its next port. Somewhere in the medical bay, Brendan's body lay in cold storage. Somewhere in the investigation files, questions were piling up that would eventually demand answers. And in that cabin on Deck 5, 7 friends who'd once been closer than family stared at each other with suspicion and fear, each wondering which of them had blood on their hands twice over. The FBI agents who met the Caribbean Queen in Miami were thorough, but ultimately powerless. They interviewed all 7 surviving friends separately, documented inconsistencies, noted the suspicious timing. But Brendan's death had occurred in international waters, and the ship was registered in Panama under a Liberian corporation. Jurisdiction was a nightmare. The best they could do was file reports and recommend further investigation by maritime authorities, who would likely never follow through. Brendan's phone told the story his friends wouldn't. Text messages to the private investigator, a former Chicago detective named Robert Walsh, detailed everything. Walsh had found the original police reports from Katie Morris's death and noticed that 4 witness statements were too similar, using identical phrasing in key sections. He'd interviewed Katie's parents, who described their daughter's terror of heights, her cautious nature, her relationship with Brendan that had been serious and happy. He'd found the party's host, now a lawyer in Boston, who remembered Sophie arguing loudly with Katie that night about something he couldn't hear. The text messages showed Brendan's plan. He would confront Tyler first at breakfast, then Marcus in the afternoon, Sophie before dinner, and David last. He believed one of them would break under pressure, away from the others, trapped on a ship with nowhere to run. His final text to Walsh, sent at 11:32 p.m. the night he died, read, "David knows something. Going to push him harder tomorrow. I think he's the weak link." At 2:15 a.m., Brendan had received a text from an unknown number. "Come to deck 14. Crew entrance near the aft stairs. I'll tell you everything about Katie. Come alone." The message had been sent from a burner phone purchased in Miami the day before boarding, paid for with cash, never used again. Security footage showed Brendan leaving his cabin at 2:40 a.m., walking toward the aft stairwell. The cameras in that stairwell malfunctioned at 2:43 a.m. and didn't resume recording until 3:28 a.m. 45 minutes of blank footage during the exact window when Brendan reached deck 14 and went over the railing. The technical team insisted it was a glitch, a software error. But Delgado didn't believe in coincidences. Someone with knowledge of the ship's systems had disabled those cameras. Someone who'd planned this carefully. On day 6, David collapsed during lunch, vomiting violently, convulsing. The ship's doctor suspected poisoning, possibly something in his food. David claimed someone had definitely poisoned him, that his orange juice at breakfast had tasted bitter. But tests were inconclusive. The juice glass had been cleared by dining staff. No evidence remained. David recovered after 12 hours of treatment, but he was different. Paranoid. He refused to eat anything that hadn't been prepared in front of him. He stopped attending group meals. When the ship docked, he was the first off, disappearing into Miami without saying goodbye to anyone. The others scattered too. Tyler flew back to Seattle, Marcus to San Francisco. The women split up without the emotional farewells that had marked their arrival. They'd come as old friends celebrating a decade of survival beyond college. They left as strangers bound by secrets and suspicion. The case remained open but inactive. Brendan Walsh's death was officially undetermined, neither accident nor homicide. The private investigators' findings about Katie Morris were noted but not pursued. 10 years had passed. Evidence was gone. Witnesses' memories were unreliable. And reopening an accidental death case from a different jurisdiction based on one man's obsession seemed pointless to overworked detectives with active murders to solve. But Robert Walsh, the private investigator, didn't let it go. He compiled everything into a file and sent copies to Katie's parents and to each of the 7 surviving friends. Inside was a note. "One of you killed Katie Morris. One of you killed Brendan Walsh. And one of you tried to kill David Chen. I may not be able to prove it, but you'll have to live with knowing that I know. And eventually, so will everyone else." 6 months later, Sophie Ramsey was found dead in her Boston apartment. Apparent suicide, pills, and alcohol. Her suicide note apologized to Katie's parents for lying about what happened that night. She didn't name who pushed Katie, but she confirmed it wasn't an accident. The note was vague enough that police couldn't build a case, but specific enough that everyone who'd been at that party knew the truth was finally bleeding out. 1 year after the cruise, Marcus Chen was struck by a car in San Francisco. Hit and run. Never solved. Tyler Jameson moved to London and refused to speak to any of his old friends. Claire Donovan quit social work and disappeared. Last seen working at a women's shelter in rural Oregon under a different name. Jenna and Aisha stayed in touch, but never mentioned the crews, Katie, or Brendan. And David Chen, who'd survived poisoning on the Caribbean Queen, lived in a studio apartment in Manhattan with 3 locks on his door, sleeping pills by his bed, and a loaded handgun in his nightstand. Because he knew something the others didn't. He knew who'd sent that text message to Brendan. He knew who'd disabled the cameras. He knew who'd poisoned his orange juice. And he knew they weren't finished yet. Because there were still 5 people alive who'd been on that balcony when Katie Morris died. 5 people who knew the truth. And someone was systematically eliminating them, one by one, making each death look different enough that no pattern would emerge until it was too late. David waited for his turn, knowing it would come, knowing that graduation night a decade ago had set them all on a path that would end in blood, and wondering in his darkest moments if maybe they all deserved exactly what was coming. James Carter had built a modest following documenting budget travel hacks across 6 continents. My blog, Shoestring Wanderer, attracted readers who wanted adventure without the luxury price tag. When I booked passage on the Atlantic Majesty for a transatlantic crossing from New York to Southampton in April of 2016, I'd chosen the cheapest interior cabin available, planning to spend most of my time exploring the ship and documenting budget-friendly cruise strategies for my audience. The email arrived 3 days before departure. An upgrade to a suite on deck 13, complimentary, due to overbooking in lower categories. I was suspicious at first, wondering if it was a scam, but the booking confirmation came through official channels with a legitimate reservation number. I called the cruise line to verify. The representative confirmed the upgrade but seemed oddly rushed to end the conversation. Still, I wasn't going to argue with free luxury. My readers would love content comparing budget versus premium cruise accommodations. Boarding in Manhattan was chaotic, thousands of passengers funneling through security and check-in. I made my way through the crowds with my single backpack, traveling light as always. When I presented my keycard at the guest services desk to confirm my cabin assignment, the representative's smile faltered slightly. Deck 13, Suite 1301. That's correct. She handed back my keycard without meeting my eyes. Elevators are to your right. Enjoy your voyage. I noticed her glance at a coworker, some unspoken communication passing between them. But I was too excited to dwell on it. A suite. My first cruise ship suite. The photos alone would generate thousands of views. The elevator was packed with families and couples, everyone chattering excitedly about their cabins and dinner reservations. I pressed the button for Deck 13. The conversations died. Several passengers looked at me, then quickly looked away. An older woman near the front actually took a small step back, as if creating distance. The elevator stopped at Deck 10, then 11, then 12. When the doors opened on 13, I was alone. Everyone else was continuing to higher decks, though I could feel their eyes on me as I stepped out. The corridor was silent, unnaturally silent. Ships were supposed to be noisy, alive with the sounds of passengers and crew, doors opening and closing, distant music and conversation. Deck 13 felt abandoned. The carpet was pristine, the lighting perfect. But something about the space felt wrong. Too still, too empty. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. Suite 1301 was at the end, a corner location. I slid my keycard into the lock and pushed open the door. The suite was spectacular. A large living area with a sofa and entertainment center, a separate bedroom with a king bed, a bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, and a private balcony overlooking the ocean. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light. Fresh flowers sat on the coffee table. a bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket with a welcome card. This wasn't just an upgrade, this was easily a $5,000 suite for a week-long crossing. I immediately started filming, narrating my disbelief for my viewers. I documented every detail, panning across the luxurious furnishings, zooming in on the amenities. But as I filmed, I noticed things that seemed off. The flowers were real, but had no scent. The champagne bottle was covered in condensation, but the ice in the bucket was completely melted. The welcome card was addressed to guest rather than my name. And when I stepped onto the balcony, I realized I couldn't hear anything from the decks above or below. Just wind and ocean, as if this suite existed in isolation. I spent the afternoon exploring the ship, leaving my suite around 3 p.m. The corridor was still empty. I took the stairs down to deck 12 and was immediately hit by the normal chaos of cruise ship life. Families with children running past, elderly couples strolling arm in arm, crew members pushing carts of linens. The contrast was jarring. At dinner that evening, I mentioned my cabin number to my table mates, a retired couple from Ohio celebrating their 40th anniversary. The wife's face went pale. Deck 13? Are you certain? Suite 1301. Amazing space. I got lucky with an upgrade. The husband cleared his throat uncomfortably. That's wonderful. Very fortunate. But the wife leaned forward, lowering her voice. My sister worked on cruise ships for 20 years. She always said deck 13 was bad luck. Most ships skip that number entirely, go straight from 12 to 14. I didn't know the Atlantic Majesty even had a deck 13. It's definitely there. I can show you if you'd like. No, she said too quickly. No, that's quite all right. Later, I stopped a crew member in the hallway, a young woman pushing a housekeeping cart. Excuse me, I'm in suite 1301. Could I get some extra towels? The woman's expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed alarm. Deck 13? Yes. Is that a problem? No problem. I'll have someone bring towels right away. She hurried off without asking how many towels I needed or when I'd like them delivered. I returned to my suite around 10 p.m., tired from exploring the massive ship. The corridor on deck 13 was still silent and empty. I'd seen crew members on every other deck, passengers coming and going at all hours. But deck 13 remained eerily deserted. I unlocked my suite and stepped inside. The layout had changed, not dramatically. The furniture was in the same positions. My belongings were where I'd left them. But something was different. The suite felt larger somehow, the walls farther apart. The balcony door was open, though I distinctly remembered closing and locking it. And the flowers, which had been fresh that afternoon, were now completely wilted, petals scattered across the coffee table. I walked through the suite slowly, filming everything, narrating my observations. My voice sounded strange in the empty space, muffled and flat despite the high ceilings. When I reached the bedroom, I found my backpack on the bed, open, my clothes and equipment scattered as if someone had been searching through my belongings. I checked the door, still locked from the inside. The balcony was too high for anyone to have climbed up from below. I was 13 decks above the waterline. I spent my first night on the Atlantic Majesty lying awake, listening to the silence of deck 13, wondering what exactly I'd been upgraded into. And why, when I'd tried to take the elevator down to deck 12 around midnight, the button for deck 13 no longer existed on the panel. According to the elevator, the ship jumped from deck 12 directly to deck 14. But I knew better. I was living on deck 13, I just wasn't sure if anyone else knew I was there. The first night, I'd attributed the sounds to normal ship noises. Old vessels creak and groan, pipes rattle, engines hum through the floors. But by the second night, I knew I was hearing something different. Something deliberate. It started around 2 a.m. Footsteps in the corridor outside my suite, slow and measured, pacing back and forth. I lay in bed listening, waiting for them to fade as whoever it was returned to their cabin. But they continued, back and forth, back and forth. The same stretch of hallway for nearly an hour. I finally got up and looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty, completely empty. But I could still hear the footsteps, clear as anything, leather shoes on carpet. I opened my door carefully, stepping out into the hallway. The sound stopped immediately. The silence that replaced it was thick and oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines far below. I walked the length of the corridor, checking every door. All the suites on deck 13 had numbers in the 1300 range, 1301 through 1312. I counted them, 12 suites total. But when I looked at the doors carefully in the dim hallway lighting, I noticed something strange. No light seeped from under any of them. No sounds of televisions or conversations or running water. Every single suite appeared completely dark and unoccupied. I returned to my room and locked the door, suddenly very aware of how alone I was on this deck. I tried to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched through the darkness. The third night brought new sounds. Voices from the suite next to mine, 1302. Muffled conversations, multiple people talking over each other. Sometimes laughter, sometimes what sounded like crying. I pressed my ear against the shared wall and listened. The voices were speaking English, but I couldn't make out actual words. Just the rhythm and cadence of conversation, rising and falling like waves. Around 3 a.m., I went into the hallway and knocked on the door of 1302. The voices stopped immediately. I knocked again, louder. "Hello? Sorry to bother you, but I'm your neighbor. Just wanted to introduce myself." Nothing. Complete silence. I tried the door handle. Locked. I returned to my suite and listened at the wall again. The voices had resumed, but quieter now, more cautious. And I realized with growing unease that they seemed to be discussing me. I heard my suite number mentioned, 1301, over and over. By day 4, I'd had enough. I needed answers. I went down to the ship's library, a quiet space on deck 7 with computers, available for passenger use. I searched for information about the Atlantic Majesty, specifically about Deck 13. What I found made my hands go cold. 3 years earlier, in March of 2013, the Atlantic Majesty had experienced a viral outbreak during a transatlantic crossing. Norovirus, the article said, though some passengers disputed that diagnosis. 11 people had died, all of them housed on Deck 13. The outbreak had been contained to that deck only, leading to speculation about contaminated ventilation systems or water supply. The cruise line had sealed Deck 13 after that voyage, promising it would never be used for passengers again. I found deck plans from before the outbreak. Deck 13 had been premium accommodations, 12 luxury suites identical to the one I was staying in now. After the outbreak, new deck plans showed the ship jumping from Deck 12 to 14. Officially, Deck 13 no longer existed. But I was living there. I had a key card that worked. I'd been upgraded through official channels. How was that possible? I went directly to guest services, my laptop under my arm with the articles pulled up. The woman at the desk was different from the one who checked me in. She smiled professionally as I approached. "I need to speak with a manager. There's a problem with my cabin assignment." "Of course, sir. What seems to be the issue?" "I'm in Suite 1301, on Deck 13, which according to these articles shouldn't exist anymore." I turned my laptop to show her the news stories. Her smile never wavered, but something changed in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but there must be some confusion. The Atlantic Majesty doesn't have a Deck 13. Our decks go from 12 to 14. What deck is your cabin actually on?" 13. Deck 13. Suite 1301. I held up my key card, showing her the number printed on the sleeve. She took the key card and examined it, her professional composure finally cracking slightly. She typed something into her computer, frowned, typed more. Her fingers were moving faster now, clicking through screens. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Confusion? Pity? "Sir, according to our system, you're assigned to cabin 1047, an interior cabin on Deck 10. That's what you booked, and that's what our records show." "That's impossible. I've been staying in 1301 for 3 days. I have photos, video." I started pulling up files on my laptop, showing her footage of my suite. She studied the images carefully. "This does appear to be one of our premium suites, but I can assure you, there is no Deck 13 on this vessel." She made a phone call, speaking quietly to someone. When she hung up, she said, "Security is coming to escort you to your actual cabin. We'll get this sorted out." 2 security officers arrived within minutes. I showed them my key card, explained about the upgrade email, showed them my photos and videos. They exchanged glances that made my stomach tighten. "Sir, we're going to need you to show us this suite you've been staying in," the older officer said. We took the elevator together, all 4 of us. I pressed the button for Deck 13. The button didn't illuminate. The officer reached past me and pressed it himself. Nothing. According to the elevator panel, Deck 13 simply didn't exist as an option. "It was there before," I insisted. "I've been using it for 3 days." "Let's take the stairs," the younger officer suggested. We climbed from Deck 12. The stairwell went straight from the 12th floor landing to the 14th. There was no door, no landing, no access point for Deck 13. Just a longer stretch of stairs between floors, as if the space where Deck 13 should be was empty air. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "I've been sleeping there. I have a key card. How is this possible?" The older officer took my key card and examined it closely. "Sir, this card has the correct Atlantic Majesty branding, but the suite number is wrong. 1301 isn't a valid cabin designation on this ship. Where did you get this?" "It was sent to me. The upgrade email. I showed it to the woman at check-in and she confirmed it." We returned to guest services. The original woman who checked me in was on duty now. When the security officer showed her my key card and asked about the upgrade, her face went pale. "I don't remember checking in anyone for Deck 13. That's not possible. I would never..." She pulled up the passenger manifest. "James Carter, you're listed in cabin 1047. You checked in 4 days ago. According to our key logs, you were issued a key card for that cabin and that cabin only." I felt reality tilting around me. Then where have I been sleeping? Where are my belongings? I left everything in Suite 1301. The officers escorted me to cabin 1047. The door was locked. They used a master key to open it. Inside, I found my backpack sitting on the bed, exactly as I remembered packing it. My clothes hanging in the closet, my toiletries in the bathroom. Everything was there, arranged as if I'd been using the cabin all along. But I hadn't been. I knew I hadn't been. I'd been on deck 13, in Suite 1301, with the wilted flowers and the melted ice and the voices through the walls and the footsteps in empty corridors. "Sir, have you been taking any medications?" the younger officer asked gently. "Have you been drinking heavily? Using any substances?" "No, nothing. I'm telling you the truth. I've been staying on deck 13. They had the ship's doctor examine me. He found nothing wrong. No signs of intoxication or drug use. No evidence of medical issues that might cause hallucinations. But he recommended I rest, suggested the stress of travel might be affecting me. That night, I lay in cabin 1047, a tiny interior room with no windows, trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything. The upgrade email, the suite, the empty corridor. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking. Maybe I'd had some kind of episode brought on by exhaustion. But when I checked my laptop, the photos were still there. Hours of video footage showing Suite 1301 in perfect detail. The living room, the bedroom, the balcony with its view of the ocean, the wilted flowers, the melted ice, all of it documented and undeniable. I was editing the footage, preparing to upload it to my blog, when I noticed something in the background of one of the videos. I'd been filming the living room, panning across the furniture and windows. But there, reflected in the glass of the balcony door, was a figure, standing behind me, watching me film. I hadn't been alone in that suite. I'd never been alone. I zoomed in on the reflection, enhancing the image as much as my software would allow. The figure was tall, wearing what appeared to be a bathrobe or pajamas. Their face was blurred, but I could make out enough details to see something was wrong. The skin looked mottled, discolored, and the expression, what I could see of it, was one of desperate pleading. I checked every video I'd shot in Suite 1301. The figure appeared in 11 of them, always in reflections, always watching me. Sometimes in the bedroom mirror, sometimes in the darkened television screen. Once, horribly, in the glass of a picture frame just inches from where I'd been sleeping. My hands were shaking as I counted. 11 videos, 11 figures. And I remembered the news articles. 11 passengers had died on deck 13 during the outbreak. Their bodies had been kept in cold storage in the ship's morgue for the remainder of the voyage, unable to be removed until the ship docked. They'd been sealed on deck 13 with their killers, with the virus that had murdered them, for 5 days while the Atlantic Majesty completed its crossing. I packed my backpack immediately. I didn't care about losing money on the cruise. I would disembark at the next port, Southampton, and fly home. But when I tried to leave cabin 1047, my keycard wouldn't work on the door. I tried again and again, but the light stayed red. The door wouldn't unlock from the inside. I called security from the cabin phone, explained I was locked in. They said they'd send someone immediately. I waited. An hour passed. 2 hours. No one came. I called again. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. When I finally gave up and tried to sleep, exhausted and frightened, I dreamed I was back in Suite 1301. The corridor outside was full of people now, passengers in bathrobes and pajamas, all of them moving slowly, purposefully, toward my door. I could see them through the peephole. 11 people with mottled skin and desperate pleading faces. They'd been alone on deck 13 for 3 years, trapped in suites that officially didn't exist, on a deck that had been sealed and forgotten. And now they had company. Now they had me. and they weren't going to let me leave. I woke with a start at 3:33 a.m. The door to cabin 1047 was standing wide open. Not just unlocked, but completely open, as if inviting me to leave. I grabbed my backpack and ran. The corridor outside was wrong. I was supposed to be on deck 10, but the hallway stretched impossibly long in both directions, lined with doors bearing 1,300 numbers. I was back on deck 13, or I'd never left. I couldn't tell anymore which reality was true. I ran toward what I thought were the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. But every turn led to another identical hallway. The same carpet pattern, the same lighting, the same endless doors. I was running in circles, getting more disoriented with each frantic turn. Behind me, I heard doors opening. Slow, methodical, one after another. 11 doors opening in sequence. I finally found a stairwell and threw myself through the door, tumbling down the stairs until I reached deck 12. Real deck 12, with normal cruise ship noise and lighting and passengers. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping, and grabbed the first crew member I saw, a young man carrying towels. Deck 13, I panted. I need to report something about deck 13. There are people trapped up there. His expression shifted to concern. Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine. I need security. There's something wrong with deck 13. Sir, this ship doesn't have a deck 13. Look. He pulled out a laminated deck plan from his cart and showed me. The numbers went from 12 to 14. See? No deck 13. It's a superstition thing. Most ships skip that number. I have proof. I fumbled for my phone, pulling up the photos. But the screen showed only darkness. Every photo I'd taken in Suite 1301 was completely black. The videos too. Hours of footage, all of it corrupted or deleted. No, they were here. I had evidence. Sir, I think you should see the ship's doctor. You seem very confused. I spent the next hour being shuttled between security, medical, and guest services. Each person I spoke to looked at me with the same mixture of concern and suspicion. They showed me passenger manifests, key logs, security footage. According to every record, I'd been in cabin 1047 the entire voyage. I'd never accessed deck 13 because deck 13 didn't exist. When I showed them the key card with 1301 printed on it, they examined it and declared it a fake. Possibly something I'd created myself for attention, for my blog. The guest services manager suggested I might be manufacturing a viral story at the ship's expense. She threatened to have me removed at the next port for harassment and filing false reports. I stopped arguing. Stopped trying to convince them. When we docked in Southampton the next morning, I was the first passenger off the ship, practically running down the gangway with my backpack. I never published the blog post about my Atlantic Majesty experience. What would I say? That I'd been upgraded to a deck that didn't exist? That I'd spent 3 nights with 11 dead passengers? I had no proof, no photos, no videos, just the key card, which I kept in my desk drawer, afraid to throw it away, but terrified to look at it too closely. 6 months later, I received an email. No sender name, just a string of numbers. The subject line read, "Thank you for visiting Deck 13. The body of the email contained a single attachment, a photo. I almost deleted it without opening. But curiosity won. The image showed the interior of Suite 1301, my suite. But I wasn't the one in the photo. The room was filled with people, 11 people in bathrobes and pajamas. their skin mottled in gray, their eyes fixed on the camera with desperate intensity. And sitting among them, in the chair where I'd sat editing my videos, was another figure. Fresh, recent. A woman in her 30s, holding a laptop, her expression confused and frightened. She was filming them, documenting them, just as I had. Another travel blogger, maybe. Another budget traveler who'd gotten a mysterious upgrade. I tried to reply to the email, but it bounced back. Address not found. I searched for news about the Atlantic Majesty, looking for missing passenger reports or strange incidents. Found nothing. The ship continued its routes, transatlantic crossings every few weeks, carrying thousands of passengers who would never know about the deck that didn't exist. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder who's staying in Suite 1301 right now. Who got the upgrade email? Who's hearing footsteps in empty corridors and voices through the walls? Who's about to discover that some cruise ship cabins come with more than complimentary champagne and ocean views? They come with permanent residents who've been waiting 3 years for company, for witnesses, for someone to finally acknowledge that they're still there, still trapped, still dying over and over on a deck the world insists doesn't exist. And I wonder if that woman in the photo ever made it off the ship, or if she's still there, number 12 in a collection that keeps growing, one mysterious upgrade at a time. I'd graduated from UCLA 3 days earlier with a degree in marine biology and a job offer waiting for me in San Diego. The cruise was my best friend Rachel's idea. A last hurrah before we all scattered across the country to start our adult lives. 8 of us had pooled our money for this 7-night Caribbean cruise aboard the Sunset Empress, departing from Fort Lauderdale on June 12, 2015. We'd spent the evening celebrating at the ship's nightclub, drinking overpriced cocktails and dancing until our feet hurt. By midnight, everyone was ready to crash. Rachel and I shared a cabin on Deck 8, and I could hear her snoring gently from her bed as I lay awake, too wired from the excitement and alcohol to sleep. The cabin felt stuffy despite the air conditioning, and I kept thinking about the pool on the Lido deck. I'd always loved swimming at night. During college, I'd sneak into the campus pool after hours, floating on my back and staring at the stars. There was something meditative about it, the weightlessness and silence. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m., and made a decision. I'd go for a quick swim, burn off some energy, and be back before Rachel even noticed I was gone. I pulled on my bikini and threw a cover-up over it, grabbed a towel from the bathroom, and slipped out of the cabin as quietly as possible. The corridors were empty except for a crew member pushing a cleaning cart who barely glanced at me. I took the elevator to the Lido deck, expecting to find at least a few other passengers, maybe some late-night partiers or insomniacs like me. But when the elevator doors opened, the deck was completely deserted. The pool area was eerily quiet. During the day, this space was chaos, packed with families and screaming children, music blasting from speakers, the smell of sunscreen and chlorine thick in the air. Now it was silent except for the distant hum of the ship's engines and the soft lap of water against the pool's edges. The overhead lights were dimmed to a soft blue glow that made everything look underwater. Safety lights, I figured. Enough to see by, but not enough to disturb sleeping passengers in nearby cabins. I dropped my towel and cover-up on a lounge chair and walked to the pool's edge. The water was perfectly still, like glass, reflecting the dim lights and the dark sky above. No ripples, no movement, almost unnaturally calm. I dipped my toe in and found it warm, almost too warm, like bathwater. During the day, the pool had been refreshingly cool, but I chalked it up to the tropical night air and the lack of people constantly churning the water. I dove in, breaking the surface with barely a splash, and let myself sink to the bottom. 8 feet down, my hands touched the pool floor, smooth tile cool against my palms. I pushed off and surfaced, floating on my back, staring up at the stars, visible beyond the ship's superstructure. This was what I'd needed. Silence, solitude, just me and the water. I floated there for several minutes, my eyes closed, letting the gentle motion of the ship rock me. When I finally opened my eyes and looked around, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. There were 4 other people in the pool with me. They were floating too, their bodies perfectly still in the water, arranged in a loose circle around me. I couldn't see their faces clearly in the dim blue lighting, just their silhouettes. 2 men, 2 women, all adults. They must have entered while my eyes were closed, though I hadn't heard any splashes or movement. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Sorry, didn't realize anyone else was here." No response. They just floated there, motionless, facing me. The water around them was completely still, not even the small ripples that breathing and treading water should create. I felt a flutter of unease in my chest. Something about this felt wrong. "Are you guys okay?" Still no response. Still no movement. I started swimming toward the pool's edge, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was up here. The nearest cabins were several decks below. The pool deck was enormous, and I couldn't see anyone else anywhere. As I swam toward the ladder, the 4 figures moved, not swimming exactly, but gliding through the water without any visible motion, repositioning themselves to block my path to the exit. They were still arranged in a circle, but now the circle was tighter, closer to me. I could see their faces better now in the blue light. Their eyes were open, wide open, too wide, and they were staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Their mouths were closed, lips pressed together in expressions that weren't quite smiles. And their skin, in the dim lighting, looked wrong. Pale and slightly bloated, with a grayish tinge that reminded me of something I'd seen in my marine biology classes. Bodies that had been in the water too long. I changed direction, swimming toward a different section of the pool's edge. The figures moved again, cutting off my escape route. They were faster than me, impossibly fast, gliding through the water without creating ripples or splashes. And they were silent, completely silent. No sounds of breathing or movement. Just the eerie stillness of their floating bodies. My heart was racing now, panic flooding my system. I dove under the water, thinking I could swim beneath them to reach the ladder. But when I opened my eyes underwater, all 4 of them were there, suspended in the water around me, their eyes still open and staring. Their hair floated around their faces in slow motion. Their arms hung limp at their sides, and I could see now that they weren't treading water at all. They were just hovering there, motionless, defying physics and everything I knew about how bodies behaved in water. I surfaced, gasping, and screamed. My scream echoed across the empty deck, bouncing off the metal walls and glass doors. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding those figures suspended in the water. As my voice died away, all 4 of them began to sink. Not swimming down, not diving, just descending straight down through the water like stones, their bodies rigid and their eyes still fixed on me until the blue-lit water swallowed them completely. I thrashed toward the ladder, my swimming technique forgotten in pure panic. My hands found the metal rungs, and I hauled myself out of the pool so fast I scraped my shin against the edge. I didn't care. I grabbed my towel and cover-up and ran toward the elevator, my wet feet slapping against the deck. That's when I heard the splashing behind me. Not the sound of someone swimming, but something breaking the surface. 4 somethings. I didn't look back. I just ran faster, pressing the elevator call button over and over, willing it to come faster. The splashing continued, getting closer. Wet footsteps on the deck now, multiple sets, moving toward me with that same eerie coordination they'd shown in the water. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. I threw myself inside and hammered the closed door button. Just before the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of them standing at the edge of the pool area, water streaming from their bodies, their faces clearer now in the light from the elevator. Their eyes were clouded and gray. Their skin had that bloated, waterlogged appearance I'd noticed underwater. And they were all wearing swimsuits from a different era, styles I'd only seen in vintage photos. The doors closed. I collapsed against the elevator wall, shaking violently, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The elevator descended toward Deck 8. I kept expecting it to stop, for the doors to open and reveal those 4 figures waiting for me. But it didn't. It delivered me safely to my floor. I ran back to my cabin, nearly dropping my keycard twice before managing to unlock the door. Rachel was still asleep, her gentle snoring unchanged. I stood in the bathroom with the light on, staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wild, my hair plastered to my head. There was a scrape on my shin from the pool ladder, bleeding slightly. Proof that I'd been there. Proof it was real. I dried off and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 4 faces staring at me through the water. Their eyes too wide, their expressions frozen in something that wasn't quite human anymore. When morning came, I told myself it had been a dream. The alcohol, the exhaustion, my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. I almost believed it until Rachel mentioned at breakfast that she'd heard me come in around 3 a.m. "You were really late," she said, spreading jam on her toast. "Where'd you go?" "Just couldn't sleep. Took a walk around the ship." "Did you go swimming? Your hair was wet." I opened my mouth to deny it, but something made me stop. "Yeah, just for a few minutes. The pool was empty." Rachel laughed. "God, that's brave. I'd be terrified swimming alone at night." "Didn't you see the memorial they have posted by the pool? 4 passengers drowned there back in like 2005. Different cruises, but all in that same pool. Creepy, right?" My fork clattered onto my plate. "What?" "Yeah, there's a little plaque. I saw it yesterday when we were sunbathing. It's tucked away near the deep end. Something about remembering those lost at sea. I guess the cruise line felt guilty or whatever." She took a bite of toast. "Why? You okay? You look pale." I wasn't okay. I spent that day researching on my phone, using the ship's expensive Wi-Fi to search for information about drownings on the Sunset Empress. Found 4 separate incidents. 4 passengers who drowned in that pool over a 10-year span, each death ruled accidental. A man in 2005, a woman in 2008, another man in 2010, another woman in 2012. All drownings occurred between 2 and 3 a.m. All victims found alone in the pool with no witnesses. No clear explanation for how experienced swimmers drowned in 8 feet of calm water. I couldn't stay in my cabin. By afternoon, I had to see the pool again in daylight. Had to prove to myself that it was just an ordinary swimming pool and nothing more. I told Rachel I wanted to work on my tan and headed up to the Lido deck alone. The pool was packed with families now, children screaming and splashing, parents lounging on chairs with drinks in hand. Normal, completely normal. I found the memorial plaque Rachel had mentioned, a small brass plate mounted on the wall near the deep end. "In memory of those lost at sea," it read, followed by 4 names and dates. Thomas Weber, 2005. Jennifer Cho, 2008. Marcus Hall, 2010. Elena Rodriguez, 2012. I pulled out my phone and searched for their photos online. Found obituaries, news articles about the tragic accidents. When I saw their faces, my vision tunneled. They were the 4 people who'd been in the pool with me. The same faces I'd seen staring at me through the dim blue water. The same eyes, wide and unblinking. The same expressions frozen between human and something else. That night, I couldn't stop myself. At 1:45 a.m., I went back to the pool. I needed to understand. Rachel tried to stop me, but I insisted everything was fine. I just wanted fresh air. I promised I wouldn't swim. The deck was empty again, the water still and glassy under the safety lights. I stood at the pool's edge, staring down into the blue depths. "I know you're there," I whispered. "I know what happened to you." The water rippled, just slightly, and then they rose to the surface, one by one. Thomas, Jennifer, Marcus, Elena. They floated there, facing me, their waterlogged faces pleading, their mouths moved, but no sound came out. They were trying to tell me something. I leaned closer, trying to understand. That's when hands grabbed me from behind and pulled me backward. Security had followed me, concerned by reports of a passenger acting strangely around the pool. I fought against them, screaming that the people in the pool needed help. But when they looked, the water was empty. Just my reflection staring back from the glassy surface. They took me to the medical bay, sedated me, kept me under observation for the rest of the cruise. When we docked, my parents were waiting, Rachel having called them in, concern. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but even Rachel looked at me with pity and worry. The cruise line investigated after I filed a formal complaint. Security footage showed me entering the pool alone at 2:17 a.m. on that first night. Showed me swimming by myself, then suddenly thrashing and screaming at nothing. Showed me fleeing to the elevator with no one pursuing me. The pool had been empty, except for me the entire time. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew they'd been there. And 3 months later, I got an email from a passenger advocate group. The Sunset Empress had permanently closed and drained the Lido deck pool, citing recurring maintenance issues. No official explanation was given, but inside sources reported that multiple passengers over the years had complained about disturbing experiences at that pool, always late at night, always around 2 a.m. The email included attachments, incident reports from other passengers who'd encountered the same 4 figures. Their descriptions matched mine perfectly. The wide eyes, the bloated skin, the way they surrounded swimmers and tried to pull them under. 12 different passengers over 10 years had reported similar experiences. None had been believed. All had been dismissed as drunk or mentally unstable or attention-seeking. I forwarded the email to the families of the 4 who drowned, along with my own statement about what I'd witnessed. Only one replied, Jennifer Cho's mother. She thanked me for confirming what she'd always suspected, that her daughter hadn't drowned by accident, that something in that pool had pulled her under and held her there until her lungs filled with water, that Jennifer had been murdered by something the cruise line refused to acknowledge or address. The pool remains empty now, a dry concrete cavity on the Lido deck. The Sunset Empress still sails, but passengers complain about strange sounds coming from the drained pool at night. Splashing, voices, the sound of something moving through water that isn't there anymore. Crew members refuse to work near it after dark. And sometimes, passengers report seeing wet footprints leading from the empty pool toward the cabins, as if something is still searching for company in the deep end, still trying to drag new victims into water that no longer exists, still drowning people who were never swimming to begin with. I never went on another cruise. Can't even look at swimming pools anymore without seeing those four faces staring up at me from beneath the surface. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up feeling like I'm underwater, like hands are wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down into depths that shouldn't exist in my landlocked apartment. And I wonder if they're still looking for me. Still trying to finish what they started that night when I was foolish enough to swim alone in a pool that had already claimed 4 souls and was hungry for a 5th. We'd saved for 3 years for this cruise. My husband Mark and I had promised our kids, Lucas and his older sister Emma, that we'd take them somewhere special once the pandemic restrictions lifted. The Royal Caribbean cruise departing from Miami on September 15th, 2021 seemed perfect. 7 nights through the Caribbean, stops in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, all the activities the kids had been missing during lockdowns. Lucas had been fine the first 2 days. Running around the ship with Emma, swimming in the pool, eating his weight in pizza and ice cream at the buffet. He was 10 years old, all energy and excitement, making up for 2 years of canceled birthday parties and missed play dates. But on the morning of day 3, he woke up burning with fever. I felt his forehead and my stomach dropped. He was radiating heat, his face flushed, his eyes glassy. The thermometer read 103.7. Mark and I exchanged worried looks. We'd been so careful during the pandemic, masking and sanitizing and keeping the kids isolated. The cruise had felt like finally emerging from a bunker. And now this. "It's probably just a regular virus, honey," Mark said, trying to sound confident. Kids get fevers all the time. But this felt different. Lucas was lethargic in a way that wasn't normal for him. Usually when he was sick, he'd complain dramatically, milk the attention. Now he just lay there, barely responding when we spoke to him. Emma watched from her bed, scared. We called the ship's medical center and were told to bring him down immediately. The facility was on deck 2, tucked away in a part of the ship hadn't even known existed. We had to wind through crew corridors to reach it, following posted signs, passing through areas that felt more industrial than the polished passenger spaces above. The doctor who examined Lucas was a middle-aged man with a German accent, Dr. Werner Hoffmann according to his name tag. He was thorough and professional, checking Lucas's vital signs, looking in his ears and throat, asking about symptoms. Lucas barely had the energy to cooperate, just lying on the examination table with his eyes half closed. "It is likely a viral infection," Dr. Hoffmann said finally. "But given his fever and lethargy, I would like to keep him overnight for observation. We can monitor his temperature, keep him hydrated with IV fluids, ensure there are no complications." "Can't we just take him back to our cabin?" I asked. "I can monitor him. I'm a teacher. I've dealt with sick kids before." Dr. Hoffmann's expression was kind but firm. "Mrs. Patterson, our medical protocols require overnight observation for fevers above 103 in children. It is for his safety and for the safety of other passengers. If he has something contagious, we need to contain it properly." Mark squeezed my hand. "It's just one night, Sarah. He'll be better monitored here than in our cabin." Everything in my maternal instinct screamed to refuse, to take my son back to our cabin where I could watch over him. But Dr. Hoffmann was the medical professional, and Mark was right. They had equipment here, medications, trained staff. Our cabin just had me and my worry. "Okay," I said finally. but I want to stay with him. I am afraid that is not possible. The observation rooms are quite small, just space for the patient. And you need to rest so you can care for him tomorrow when he is released. Dr. Hoffman smiled reassuringly. We will take excellent care of him, I promise. You can call to check on him any time, and we will contact you immediately if there are any changes in his condition. A nurse, a young woman with a Filipino accent, led Lucas through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. He looked back at me, his eyes suddenly more alert, more scared. Mom? It's okay, sweetie. You'll be back with us tomorrow. Be good for the doctors. The door closed behind them. I stood there staring at it, my hand still reaching toward where Lucas had been, feeling like I'd just made a terrible mistake. Mark put his arm around me. He's in good hands, Sarah. Let's get some rest and we'll check on him first thing in the morning. But I didn't rest. I couldn't. I lay in our cabin all night, calling the medical center every 2 hours. Each time, a different nurse answered and assured me Lucas was sleeping comfortably. His fever was coming down. Everything was fine. But something in their voices sounded wrong. Rehearsed, like they were reading from a script. At 3 a.m., I thought I heard children crying. The sound seemed to be coming from somewhere below our cabin on deck 5, echoing up through the ventilation system. Multiple children, not just fussy or upset, but genuinely distressed, terrified. I woke Mark. Do you hear that? He listened, groggy. Hear what? Children crying. It sounds like it's coming from the medical center. Sarah, you're exhausted and worried. Try to get some sleep. We'll go get Lucas first thing in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop hearing those cries, even after they faded. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong in the medical center 2 decks below, where my 10-year-old son was sleeping in a room I wasn't allowed to enter. At 6 a.m., I couldn't wait anymore. I left Mark sleeping with Emma and went down to the medical center alone. The corridors on deck 2 were empty, eerily quiet compared to the passenger areas above. I found the entrance and pushed through the door. A different nurse sat at the reception desk, an older woman with tired eyes. Can I help you? I'm here to pick up my son, Lucas Patterson. He was admitted last night with a fever. She checked her computer, her expression neutral. Dr. Hoffman will need to discharge him. He should be making rounds soon. Please have a seat. I sat in the small waiting area, my leg bouncing nervously. Through the door marked Authorized Personnel Only, I could hear sounds, equipment beeping, muffled voices, and something else, something that made my skin crawl. Children whimpering. Not one child. Several. How many children are back there? I asked the nurse. I can't discuss other patients. Privacy regulations. I heard crying last night. Multiple children. What's going on back there? Her expression hardened. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're worried about your son, but I need you to wait quietly or I'll have to ask security to escort you back to your cabin. 20 minutes later, Dr. Hoffman emerged with Lucas. My son looked pale but alert, his fever clearly gone. I rushed to him and pulled him into a hug. He was stiff in my arms, not returning the embrace. Lucas, baby, are you okay? He nodded, but didn't speak. His fever broke around 4 a.m., Dr. Hoffman said. He is fully recovered. Just keep him hydrated today, and he should be back to normal activities tomorrow. I searched Lucas's face for something. Any indication of what he'd experienced. His eyes were distant, focused on something I couldn't see. What happened back there? What did they do to you? Mrs. Patterson. We simply monitored his vital signs and administered IV fluids. Standard medical care. Dr. Hoffman's smile didn't reach his eyes. He may be tired from the fever and disrupted sleep. That's completely normal. I signed the discharge papers and took Lucas's hand. It was cold despite the warm corridor. As we left, I glanced back through the closing door and saw it. A long hallway lined with rooms, and in each doorway, a small face peering out. Children, at least 6 of them, maybe more. All with the same distant, haunted expression Lucas now wore. Back in our cabin, Lucas climbed into bed and faced the wall. Emma tried to talk to him, but he ignored her. Mark attempted jokes, tickling, anything to get a reaction. Nothing worked. Maybe he's just tired, Mark suggested, though doubt crept into his voice. That night, Lucas's screams woke us all. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes open but unseeing, shrieking words I couldn't understand. When I tried to hold him, he fought me with shocking strength. The needles. Make them stop with the needles. There's so many of us. We can't leave. We can't leave. It took 20 minutes to calm him down. When he finally recognized us, he started crying. Not the normal crying of a scared child, but the deep, broken sobs of someone who'd experienced real trauma. Lucas, what happened in the medical center? What did they do to you? He shook his head violently. I can't tell. He said I can't tell. He said he'd know if I told. He said he'd come back for me. Who said that? Dr. Hoffman? Lucas pulled the covers over his head and wouldn't answer any more questions. The nightmares continued every night for the rest of the cruise. Lucas would wake screaming about needles, about tests, about rooms full of children who couldn't leave. During the day, he was withdrawn and jumpy, flinching whenever he saw crew members in medical uniforms. He refused to go anywhere near Deck 2. Emma pulled me aside on day 6. Mom, Lucas showed me something. He made me promise not to tell, but I think you need to see. She lifted Lucas's shirt while he slept. His arms were covered in small puncture marks, neat rows of them on both inner arms. Injection sites. Dozens of them. My blood ran cold. Mark, look at this. We counted 23 needle marks total. Fresh ones and older ones in various stages of healing. No single IV placement could account for this many puncture wounds. Someone had been injecting him repeatedly, testing him. We went straight to the ship's guest services and demanded to speak to someone in authority. We were eventually taken to meet with the ship's hotel director, a polished woman named Victoria Chen, who listened to our story with increasing concern. I can assure you, our medical center follows strict protocols. If Dr. Hoffman administered multiple injections, it would be documented in your son's chart. Then show us the chart, Mark demanded. She made a call and requested Lucas's medical records. When they arrived, they showed exactly what Dr. Hoffman had claimed. Single IV placement for hydration, acetaminophen for fever, nothing else. No mention of the 23 injection sites covering our son's arms. This is impossible, I said, showing her photos I'd taken of Lucas's arms. Look at him. Someone did this to him. Victoria's expression shifted from professional concern to something harder to read. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're upset, but these allegations are serious. Are you certain these marks weren't present before the cruise? Of course I'm certain. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that children can have various medical conditions that present as skin abnormalities. Perhaps you should have him examined by your personal physician when you return home. We were being dismissed. Worse, we were being gaslit. I stood up, my hands shaking with rage. Something happened to my son in your medical center. Other children are back there right now experiencing the same thing, and you're covering it up." Victoria's expression went cold. "Mrs. Patterson, if you continue making these accusations without evidence, I'll be forced to report you to authorities for making false claims. That could result in legal action from the cruise line." We left her office defeated and terrified. We couldn't prove what had happened to Lucas. We had only his nightmares, his trauma, and the needle marks that apparently only we could see in the photos. Because every crew member we showed them to claimed they saw nothing unusual. When we disembarked in Miami 2 days later, Lucas held my hand so tight his nails drew blood. As we walked down the gangway, he looked back at the ship one last time. And I saw it too. On deck 2, behind the windows of the medical center, small faces pressed against the glass. Children, still there, still trapped, still being used for whatever Dr. Hoffman had been doing in those observation rooms. Lucas never spoke about what happened during his overnight stay. Not to therapists, not to doctors, not even to Emma. Whatever he experienced in the Royal Caribbean Medical Center had been terrible enough that even years later, he couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. We tried to investigate, to report what had happened, but every avenue led nowhere. The cruise line denied everything. No other parents came forward, and Lucas's medical records showed nothing unusual had occurred. But I know what I saw in those photos before they mysteriously corrupted and became unrecoverable. I know what I heard in Lucas's nightmares. And I know that somewhere, on cruise ships sailing international waters where laws are murky and oversight is minimal, there are medical centers doing things to children that have nothing to do with healing. Things that require overnight stays in locked rooms. Things that leave needle marks and nightmares and trauma so deep it can never be spoken aloud. And every time I see a cruise ship ad on television, I wonder how many children are in their medical centers right now. How many are being told it's just for observation? How many parents are being turned away at the door, assured everything is fine, while their children experience horrors they'll never be able to describe. 6 months after the cruise, Lucas finally started talking. His therapist, Dr. Yolanda Martinez, had been working with him twice a week, slowly building trust. She called us in February of 2022 to say Lucas had disclosed something significant during their session. She needed our permission to share it with authorities. We sat in her office while she played the recording. Lucas's small voice, halting and scared, describing what had happened in the medical center's overnight ward. There were 8 of us, in separate rooms, but we could hear each other. The walls were thin. We couldn't get out. The doors locked from the outside. His voice cracked. Dr. Hoffman came in every hour. He had needles, different colored liquids. He said we were helping sick people, that we were heroes. But it hurt. Some of the medicines made me throw up. Some made everything blurry. One made my heart beat so fast I thought I was dying. I grabbed Mark's hand, tears streaming down my face. He wrote everything down. How we reacted. What happened to our bodies. There was a girl, maybe 7, she had seizures after 1 injection. He just watched and took notes. Didn't help her, just watched. Lucas's breathing was ragged on the recording. He said if we told anyone, he'd know. He said he had our addresses. He knew where we lived. He'd come back and take us somewhere worse. The recording continued for 40 minutes. Lucas described pharmaceutical trials, experimental drugs, dosage escalations. He remembered names of other children, described symptoms they'd experienced, recalled conversations between Dr. Hoffman and nurses about data collection and trial protocols. We hired an attorney that same week. She filed complaints with the FBI, the CDC, and maritime authorities. The investigation that followed uncovered everything Lucas had described, and worse. Dr. Werner Hoffmann had been conducting unauthorized pharmaceutical trials for 3 years across multiple cruise ships. He'd been recruited by a pharmaceutical company to test drugs that couldn't get approval for pediatric trials through legitimate channels. The company paid him 6 figures per cruise to gather data on children. The overnight observation ward was his laboratory. Sick children were his test subjects. The cruise line had received complaints before. At least 11 families had reported similar concerns about the medical center over the past 3 years. All had been dismissed or threatened with legal action. The company had known and had done nothing because Dr. Hoffmann's research generated significant revenue through pharmaceutical partnerships. When authorities moved to arrest Dr. Hoffmann, he was gone. His cabin was empty, his personal belongings removed. He disembarked in Jamaica 2 cruises after ours and never returned. Interpol issued an international warrant, but he'd vanished completely. His real name wasn't Werner Hoffmann. His medical credentials were fraudulent. No one knew who he actually was. The pharmaceutical company denied everything, destroyed records, settled with families quietly to avoid publicity. The cruise line paid fines and implemented new medical oversight protocols. The case remained open, but went nowhere. Without Dr. Hoffmann, there could be no prosecution. But Lucas's testimony helped identify 12 other children who'd been experimented on. 12 families who'd thought they were crazy, who'd been gaslit and dismissed. 12 children with identical needle marks and identical nightmares. We learned the drugs Lucas had been given included experimental antivirals, untested sedatives, and compounds that had failed adult safety trials. One drug he'd received was later pulled from all research after causing permanent kidney damage in rats. Lucas was lucky. Some of the other children weren't. 2 developed chronic seizure disorders. 1 had liver failure requiring a transplant. 1 died 6 months after his cruise from complications no doctor could explain. I think about those children still trapped in that medical center. The ones Lucas saw through the doors that last morning. Because only 12 families ever came forward. Lucas said there were always 8 children at a time in the overnight ward. Across 3 years of cruises, that meant hundreds of children had been taken to those locked rooms. Hundreds of families who never realized what happened to their sick kids, who chalked up the nightmares and trauma to the illness itself. And I think about Dr. Hoffmann, whoever he really is, somewhere in the world, possibly still conducting his experiments. Because men like that don't stop. They just find new hunting grounds, new ships, new children whose parents trust medical professionals to heal rather than harm. Lucas is 14 now. He still has nightmares. Still flinches when he sees anyone in medical scrubs. We've told him he's brave, that his testimony helped other families. But I don't think he feels brave. I think he feels marked, chosen. Like something in him attracted Dr. Hoffmann's attention, made him the perfect test subject. And sometimes, late at night, I hear him whispering in his room, talking to the other children, the ones who weren't as lucky as him, the ones who are still out there, still being experimented on, still crying behind locked doors in medical centers on cruise ships where no one can hear them scream. I never wanted to go on that cruise. But when my father turns 75 and announces he's chartering a yacht for the entire family to celebrate, you don't say no. Especially when your father is Richard Chen, who'd built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing and wasn't used to hearing the word no from anyone. The Serenity wasn't technically a yacht. It was a small luxury cruise ship, 150 feet of gleaming white perfection that could accommodate 30 passengers, but would carry only our family of 12. My father had booked it for 2 weeks in July of 2014. A private voyage through the South Pacific, with stops at remote islands most people had never heard of. Fiji, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands. Places where the water was so clear you could see 50 feet down and beaches remained untouched by tourism. I'm Marcus Chen, Richard's middle son, and I'd spent the last 37 years trying to live up to expectations I could never quite meet. My older brother David ran the Asia-Pacific division with ruthless efficiency. My younger sister Michelle had become a renowned cardiac surgeon. I was the disappointment, the one who'd chosen journalism over medicine or business, who'd written exposés about corporate corruption that embarrassed the family. But family was family, and when the invitation came for this voyage, I accepted. It would be me, my wife Lauren, our 2 teenagers, David and his wife with their 3 kids, Michelle traveling solo after her recent divorce, my mother Eleanor, still elegant at 72, and my father's younger brother Uncle James with his wife Aunt Patricia, both in their late 60s. We boarded the Serenity in Suva, Fiji, on July 8th. The crew of 20 greeted us with champagne and flower leis, all smiles and professional courtesy. The captain, a weathered Australian named Robert Hayes, had 30 years of experience in these waters. The staff were primarily Filipino, efficient, and nearly invisible in the way good service staff always are. The ship was spectacular. 12 luxury cabins, each with its own balcony, a formal dining room, a casual lounge, a sun deck with a pool. Everything we could possibly need for 2 weeks of isolation in paradise. That's what my father wanted. Isolation. Time with family away from business pressures and media attention and the constant demands of wealth. What he got was something very different. The first 5 days were perfect. We sailed between islands, swimming in lagoons, exploring beaches where our footprints were the only marks in the sand. The crew catered to our every whim. The food was exceptional. The weather cooperated. My father seemed happier than I'd seen him in years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, holding court at dinner, telling stories from his early days building the company. But on day 5, something changed. The crew's demeanor shifted. They became distant, almost cold. Captain Hayes started avoiding my father's questions about our route. When David asked why we were heading south instead of east toward our next scheduled island, Hayes gave vague answers about weather patterns and currents that didn't make sense. That night, my father confronted Hayes in the dining room, demanded to know why we deviated from the planned itinerary. Hayes's response chilled us all. "Mr. Chen, we're no longer following your itinerary. We're following mine now." My father's face went red with rage. "What did you just say to me?" Captain Hayes stood his ground, his expression emotionless. "I said we're following my itinerary now. You and your family will remain in your cabins starting tonight. Meals will be delivered. You'll have everything you need." David stood up, his corporate authority voice kicking in. "Captain Hayes, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this ship is under contract to our family. You work for us." "Not anymore." Hayes gestured and 2 crew members appeared in the doorway, both large men I recognized from the deck crew. "Please return to your cabins now. Don't make this difficult." My mother grabbed my father's arm. "Richard, let's just go. We'll sort this out in the morning." But my father wasn't backing down. He'd built an empire by never showing weakness. "I will have you arrested when we reach port. You'll never work again. Do you understand me?" Hayes smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen. "We're not reaching port anytime soon, Mr. Chen. Now go to your cabin or my men will escort you." We were shepherded back to our rooms like prisoners, The crew members were polite but firm, making it clear that resistance would be met with force. Once we were inside our cabins, I heard the unmistakable sound of locks engaging from the outside. Lauren grabbed my arm. "Marcus, what's happening? Are we being hijacked?" I tried the door handle. It wouldn't budge. I tried my phone. No signal this far from land, just as we'd expected. But the ship's satellite communication system should have worked. I don't know. But we need to stay calm and figure out what they want. Around midnight, the engine stopped. The constant vibration that had become background noise disappeared, leaving only the gentle sound of waves against the hull. We were drifting. I went to the balcony and looked out. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and empty. No lights from other vessels, no land in sight. We were completely isolated, exactly as my father had wanted. But now that isolation had become a trap. Through the walls, I could hear my father shouting, demanding to be let out. David's voice joined in, then Michelle's. The crew didn't respond. They just let us yell ourselves hoarse. Morning brought a tray of food slid through a slot in the door I hadn't noticed before. The door itself remained locked. No explanation. No communication. Just breakfast and the sound of the crew moving through the corridors outside. This continued for 2 days. Meals delivered through the slot. The engines silent. The ship drifting with the current. We could hear each other through the walls, voices becoming more desperate, more frightened. The children were crying. My mother was praying. My father's rage had given way to something worse. A defeated silence that scared me more than his shouting had. On the morning of the 3rd day of captivity, Captain Hayes' voice came over the ship's intercom system. "Mr. Chen, I believe it's time we discussed terms." The ransom demand was $50 million. Captain Hayes explained it calmly over the intercom, as if discussing dinner arrangements. Wire the money to an offshore account within 24 hours, or the situation would escalate. He didn't specify what escalation meant, but we heard the implied threat clearly enough. My father, pragmatic even in crisis, agreed immediately. David had access to family accounts and could make the transfer. Hayes unlocked David's cabin long enough to let him use the ship's satellite phone under armed guard. The money was wired, $50 million to an account in the Cayman Islands. Then we waited to be released. But nothing happened. The doors stayed locked. The engines remained silent. Meals continued to arrive through the slots, but the portions were smaller now. No explanation came. Through the walls, I heard my father's confusion turn to rage, turn to fear. "They have the money. Why aren't they letting us go?" Days passed. The meals became smaller still. Sometimes they didn't come at all. We rationed the bottled water that had been in our cabin. Lauren and I tried to keep the kids calm, but they knew something had gone terribly wrong. On day 8 of captivity, we heard shouting among the crew. Angry voices in the corridors, arguments that sometimes turned physical. Things were falling apart. "They're turning on each other," Lauren whispered. "The money's gone and they're fighting over what to do with us." I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The arguments grew more violent. I heard what sounded like a gunshot, then running footsteps. Then, hours later, the sound of lifeboats being lowered. The crew was abandoning ship, abandoning us. For a full day we heard nothing. No footsteps in the corridors, no sounds of the crew. Just silence and the gentle rocking of the Serenity drifting somewhere in the Pacific. David managed to break down his cabin door using furniture. He freed the rest of us, and we emerged into corridors that were completely empty. The crew's quarters were stripped clean. The lifeboats were gone. The ship's communication equipment had been destroyed. We were alone on a drifting vessel with minimal food and water, no way to call for help, and no idea where we were. My father collapsed that day, a stroke brought on by stress and dehydration. Michelle did what she could with the ship's medical supplies, but without proper equipment, she couldn't do much. He was dying, and we were helpless to stop it. For 6 more days, we drifted. We rationed what little food remained, collected rainwater, took turns watching the horizon for any sign of rescue. My father slipped in and out of consciousness, his mighty empire and iron will reduced to a frail body dying on a couch in the ship's lounge. The rescue ship found us on day 14. A cargo vessel spotted the Serenity drifting off course and investigated. They found 12 traumatized passengers, 1 critically ill, and no crew. We were taken to a hospital in Fiji. My father died 2 days later, without ever regaining full consciousness. The investigation that followed uncovered everything. Captain Hayes had gambling debts exceeding $2 million. He'd spent months planning the hijacking, recruiting crew members who were equally desperate, equally willing to commit piracy for a chance at wealth. The plan had been simple: take the ransom, abandon the family on the drifting ship, and disappear into the South Pacific with new identities. But something had gone wrong with the money. The offshore account had been frozen by international authorities, alerted by unusual transaction patterns. The $50 million was trapped, inaccessible. The crew had turned on each other, arguing about what to do next. Someone had been shot. Others had panicked. They'd fled in the lifeboats, presumably hoping to reach land and disappear, abandoning both the ransom and their hostages. None of them were ever found. The lifeboats were discovered weeks later, drifting and empty. No bodies, no trace of the crew. The South Pacific had swallowed them whole, and with them, any answers about what exactly had happened during those 2 weeks. The $50 million was eventually recovered and returned to us. But the cost was higher than money. My father was dead. My mother never recovered emotionally. The grandchildren had nightmares for years. David developed a drinking problem. Michelle withdrew from the family entirely. And me? I never wrote about it. Never published the story that would have made my career. Because some horrors are too personal, too raw to share with the world. But I still hear it sometimes, late at night. Captain Hayes' voice over the intercom, calm and cold, explaining that we were no longer in control of our own fate. The sound of my father's desperate shouting through the walls. The children crying. The gunshot that signaled everything falling apart. The terrible silence after the crew abandoned us to die. We chartered the Serenity for paradise and found hell instead. And somewhere in the South Pacific, in those beautiful crystal waters my father had wanted to show us, 20 crew members are gone. Their bodies never found. Their fate never explained. Sometimes I wonder if they made it to shore. If they're living new lives with new names, haunted by what they did to us. Or if the ocean claimed them, pulled them down into those crystal depths where the water is so clear you can see 50 feet down, all the way to the bottom where their bodies might still be, weighted and waiting, holding secrets that will never surface.